This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10. A very good morning to you. I hope you had a splendid weekend. I really do. But back to the grindstone this morning. Don't call it a grindstone, James. Back to our beautiful and occasionally quite emotional exchange of views. And speaking of the exchange of views, one day we must make a list of the things that we've learned together, or the moments that made things crystallise, made things become clear. The penny drop moments, we have called them, haven't we, over the years? Because I found myself thinking of one this weekend when honest Bob Jenrick became the latest filthy opportunist to try to turn the diversity and the long and rich history of free movement into this country, and indeed out of it, into an electoral weapon. I found myself thinking of that phrase that we only really discovered in 2016. Oh, I didn't mean you. Do you remember? I can't remember why. I was reading something. It must have popped up while I was looking for book reviews. It must have popped up an article I wrote for The Guardian years and years ago. I don't know about you. Did you ever come across stuff you did when you were younger and you just can't remember it at all? And I mean, not just you should, but actually thinking that you might have made a mistake and somehow they've put your name on an article that you didn't actually. I had no memory whatsoever. I remember writing an article. I know what I was looking for. I was looking for an article that I wrote about Paul O'Grady, the late, great Paul O'Grady, where I was trying to explain to readers of a newspaper why he was the closest the United Kingdom would ever get to David Letterman. He was such a brilliant television communicator that he was, because there was a constant search for a while to find a talk show host who'd be as good as David Letterman. And we had one all along. But because he wasn't sort of edgy, people didn't realise just how consummately brilliant Paul O'Grady was. So I was looking for that article, and I found another article I'd written for the same newspaper a few years later, in which I explained what was going to happen with regard to immigration and the Conservative Party and the right-wing media. I mean, it's like blooming Mystic Meg. You will reach a point, unless somebody gives their head a wobble, where you just are competing to beat viler and viler and viler about a largely non-existent constituency of people, which you use to spook others that they are somehow under threat. And the best encapsulation of that process I ever came across, and I came across it years after I wrote the article, was when people started ringing in, and this was about the time it happened. I remember now. So we had the widow of a doctor, the German-born widow of a doctor, who rang us from somewhere in the north of England and told us she'd already been told by neighbours, I think, that they voted Brexit in order to send her home. And we came across a frankly astonishing list of people who rang into the programme to describe. There was the psychiatrist, the French psychiatrist, whose own patients had told her that she was going to have to leave now because the Brexit vote had gone through. Even reading it back now, I found it almost impossible to believe. I think if I'd been listening to that programme, or those programmes, because we did a few, from the perspective of having just voted for Brexit, I'd have thought, and I don't know how much time you spend on social media, but stay there long enough and you will find some truly astonishing takes. But occasionally I see people say, James gets actors to ring into his show. They're not real people. Or they deliberately select the stupid ones so that he can make them look daft. And you sort of think, well, I mean, they're actually... Okay, but whatever it is, whatever gets you through the day. But I can just about imagine that if you'd voted for Brexit and you were nowhere near ready to face the consequences of your foolishness, I'll go no further than that, you would have really wanted to believe that the people ringing in, the doctor's widow, the psychiatrist, the lorry driver, all of the people ringing in to tell us what they'd already experienced, what had been unleashed. The morning after the vote, the Sun had that picture of Polish shops on a British high street, essentially saying we won't have to put up with this anymore. And the phrase that began to resonate around our studio was the phrase, "Oh, I didn't mean you." My mother-in-law voted for it, and I'm an immigrant, you told me, but she said she didn't mean you. She didn't mean you. Oh, I didn't mean you. And that was what I found myself thinking of yesterday when I saw an article written presumably in crayon by Honest Bob Jenrick, the Home Office Minister best known for ordering that a few murals of cartoon characters that might bring a tiny slither of comfort into the lives of desperate children be painted over at a processing centre for unaccompanied child migrants. So Robert Jenrick walked into a building, a bleak and unforgiving building, where children who have no adult carer with them whatsoever, who have somehow by hook or by crook made their way into this country, facing enormous peril. You don't need me to tell you that a 7-year-old girl embarked upon that journey this weekend and died. Imagine that she'd got here, the 7-year-old girl who died in a French canal this weekend. Imagine that she'd got here and Robert Jenrick knew that there was a picture of Mickey Mouse on the wall of the room that she walked into. And he decided that was too nice. That's too welcoming. That might encourage other 7-year-olds to risk their lives in flimsy dinghies to try to come here because they have some family members in Birmingham or Basingstoke or Basildon or wherever it may be. And they're the only family members they've got left in the world. And Robert Jenrick walked into that room and he saw that mural on the wall and he ordered it to be painted over. You know, it was weird listening to Priti Patel on Nick's show, wasn't it? Because it's not that long ago that you sort of thought they can't go any lower than that. You'd listen to Priti Patel banging on about immigration and you'd think that this is as bad as it gets. This is as bad as it gets. Short of actually jumping into bed with Nigel Farage, this is as low as the Tory party will go. 2 years later, Priti Patel is literally jumping on a dance floor with Nigel Farage, and people like Suella Braverman and Honest Bob Jenrick are competing to make her look like Gary Blimmin Lineker. And it's a mark, isn't it, of what happens when you let these genies out of bottles. The I didn't mean you genie. Oh yes, we're gonna demonise all immigrants. We're going to demonise all foreigners. But don't worry, because we don't mean you. And I wondered this morning, looking at Honest Bob, and indeed remembering the I didn't mean you syndrome. Pat says, my lovely Polish dentist closed up and went back to Poland after Brexit, James. There's a lot of it about. And I did think this morning when I looked upon Honest Bob Jenrick's latest intervention, latest bid for the bigoted vote, and I did find myself thinking, is it going to be different now that a white bloke's doing it? Because when the children of immigrants, whether it's Priti Patel or James Cleverly or Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch, when a child of immigration talks about how awful immigrants are, you sort of feel I don't want to say your guns are spiked, but you feel your self-editing syndrome kicking in quite hard as a very privileged, middle-class, middle-aged white commentator. I don't know why I keep saying I'm a middle-class, middle-aged white commentator. I'm a commentator, therefore I'm almost certainly middle-class, middle-aged and white. I mean, it kind of goes with the territory. You could think of some that aren't. And male, of course, although that thankfully is getting a little better. You sort of feel that you can't really go in as hard on a child of immigration who is trying to demonise immigrants as you can on someone who's not a child of immigration. I mean, you can't say that because you're an immigrant, you must therefore be in favour of, what do they call it, unlimited immigration. Because you are a beneficiary of immigration, you must therefore welcome the world and his wife into this country. I can see that that's not a fair demand to make of people. And yet, if I'm brutally honest with you, and I always try to be, it does land differently with me. In some ways, it lands worse. I know there's a phrase, isn't there, about pulling the drawbridge up. But I don't know that that's a helpful phrase. I think the helpful phrase in these sort of contexts is, I didn't mean you. I didn't mean you. So, Honest Bob Jenrick says that immigration levels have made it impossible for people to integrate in British society. He is talking undiluted gibberish. It's straight out of the Farage playbook. A quick glance around the cabinet table would show you how successfully children of immigration can integrate into this country to the point where they hold some of the very highest, two indeed, of the very, very highest offices in the land. And And yet here you have a Tory saying, oh, these immigrants, they just can't integrate. So here's the thing that struck me. He doesn't mean you. He doesn't mean you, does he? He doesn't mean Rishi Sunak or Rishi Sunak's parents. He doesn't mean David Lammy's parents, to be fair. He doesn't mean Suella Braverman's parents. He doesn't mean Priti Patel's parents. He doesn't mean James Cleverly's mum. He doesn't mean you. He doesn't mean, well, depending on what he'd say, if a journalist remembers to ask him about Lee Anderson's disgusting attack upon Sadiq Khan last week, maybe he does mean Sadiq Khan. Maybe the rules are different for Muslims. I don't know. That seems to be the direction of traffic in which the Tories are driving while pretending that they're not at the moment. But he doesn't mean you. He doesn't mean Sajid Javid's dad, does he? He doesn't. He means them, those immigrants, the ones over there. You can loosely perhaps typify them as the headbangers that attacked a kebab shop for selling Coca-Cola a couple of weeks ago. But that's what, 10, 15, 100? That can't be the grounds for condemning everybody who describes himself as an immigrant or as a child of immigration. And I don't want to ask, who does he mean? Either, because I know who he means. He means everyone and no one. He means you get to choose. It means you're basically being given permission by a Home Office minister to hate that person over there because you don't like the look of them. They're a bit too brown for it, the wrong kind of brown, or a bit too Irish maybe, or a bit too Romanian, or a bit too Polish, or a bit too black. It doesn't matter. You don't know them, because if you knew them, well, you wouldn't mean you. I don't mean you. He doesn't mean them. He means the ones you don't know, the ones you don't like the look of because they've got a big beard, or they wear a headscarf, or they don't fully, they speak a bit of foreign on trains. That's who he means. 10:15 is the time. I would like to ask, but I don't know that you can answer this question. I don't know how anyone would answer this question. I would like to ask, how do you know that people like Honest Bob Jenrick don't mean you when they attack immigration in general and immigrants universally? How do you know that he doesn't mean you? If you want to have a crack at that, I would love to hear your answer. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I find it easier to believe that you'll be able to answer this question. All right. So the first question is, how do you know that he doesn't mean you? When an actual Home Office minister goes there and says it's impossible for people to integrate into British society because they're immigrants or there's too many of them, I want you to tell me how you know he doesn't mean you. And then I want you to tell me what it's like to think that he might. So I am actually asking you who Robert Jenrick means. And I'm asking whether or not he means you. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need, all right? Who is he trying to turn you against specifically? And if you are a child of immigration, if you are a case study in integration, if you are first or second generation British, then what does it feel like to see the political pendulum swing in this direction? Because I remind you once again, they will say that they don't mean you. But how can you be confident of that? How do you know that they don't mean you? 0345 6060 973. And the other question, of course, is what does it feel like when you think, regardless of how many times they tell you that they don't mean you, you see Honest Bob Jenrick's grubby little finger pointing straight at you because he wants you to be wiped out and painted over, just like he wanted the Mickey Mouse mural to be painted over in case a desperate 7-year-old who cheated death on a journey across the English Channel, unaccompanied, possibly derived the tiniest scintilla of comfort or familiarity from a painted cartoon character on an otherwise bleak wall. He wants you to be painted over as well, I fear. How do you know that he doesn't? 10:17 is the time. I think we should all just unite for a moment to give Mark in Norwich a round of applause. Mark in Norwich is the first entry of the day, although possibly not the last, into Idiot's Corner. Mark's got in touch to say, if you had been murdered by illegal immigrants, would you still be sitting there trying to fool people into thinking that multiculturalism has worked? Mark, I have to confess that if I had been murdered by anybody, whether an illegal immigrant or a GP in Sheffield, no, I would not be sitting here today talking to you, Mark. My goodness me. How thick would you have to be to send a message like that? Anyway, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Stay away from scissors, mate.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10 is the time. On a much, much lighter note, what is the... I'm going to do this as a hook and tease, so don't let me forget to deliver. But you can only play this game if you don't already know the answer to this question. So have you noticed how television these days is, I mean, it's a more enthusiastic recycler than the average London council. Seriously, if television was a household, it would have 48 bins. So much recycling does television currently do. I should also add that I am in my early 50s, right? They're bringing back a TV detective. I read this morning that a much-loved TV detective who hasn't graced our screens for decades is being brought back. So I am going to ask you which one you would most like to see brought back. Don't ring in. Just a WhatsApp and a text. So you can WhatsApp on 0345 6060973 or you can text 84850. Which one is probably my... Well, listen, the reason why I'm interested in this is because it's the one I would have chosen. It is probably my all-time favourite retired TV tech, and he's coming back. I may give you a musical clue shortly, but first we must get stuck into the question of who honest Bob Jenrick is talking about when he says that immigrants can't integrate, because he doesn't mean you. So, number one, how do you know he doesn't mean you? And if he doesn't mean you, who does he mean? Garda is in Hackney. Garda, what would you like to say?
Yeah, well, I'm the daughter of immigrants. We left Iraq in 1968. I was 5 years old. And, what you try and do when you're an immigrant child is integrate so badly that you don't want to speak your language. You just want to learn English. And you throw yourself into sport. But this argument about I don't mean you so reminds me. I became a woman firefighter in 1985.
Oh, yeah.
There were only 13 of us at the time. And
in the whole of the LFB?
In the whole of the country.
In the whole of the country? 13? What year? 1985?
Yeah, I was number 13. I'm lucky. No, I loved it. After a while. Yeah,
I did not know that. Go on.
Yeah, firefighters are great. And, but they had real problems accepting women.
Yes.
But then they'd say, so I'd been, 2 or 3 years in Willesden, northwest London, and a woman called Ellen came to work at Park Royal, and they absolutely slated her. And I'd say, but you're talking about me when you're talking about her not being able to do the job. And they'd say, you're different, I'm not talking about you. And that's either because they believed it, which I don't think most of them did, not the guys that I work with, but the surrounding stations, or they just didn't have the guts to say it to my face. And so therefore, I think I'm an acceptable immigrant because I don't wear a hijab. I'm an atheist, my dad. And even when I point out to people, now, what I do straight away is I go, I'm Iraqi, to try and stave off the racism. And
why does that, forgive me for being a bit dense, why does that help?
It's to sort of say, look, I might not look foreign, but I am.
Oh, forgive me. I thought you were saying that Iraqi was the right kind of foreign for a racist.
No. I'm
You're just getting it out there before someone says, where are you really from?
Yeah, because as you can hear from my accent, I've lived in London all my life, and I don't really look like your typical daughter of a Muslim man.
Got you.
Even though my mum was a Christian.
Yeah.
Whatever that looks like. But, i.e., I don't wear a hijab because that's most people's idea. And even when I say that my dad was a Muslim and half my family Muslims, I can't tell you the racism from strangers about Muslim. And they'd go, and I'd go, but you're talking about my family. Oh, no, we don't mean you. Well, you do mean me.
Yes, I do know, actually. Yes, of course I do.
I don't know whether they're thick. I don't know. I don't know whether they're thick. I don't know. So I just really feel, James, for Muslims. I really do. I think it's been coming for a long time.
So that's who Robert Jenrick means. I'm not being glib,
I think it would really suit them.
He just means Muslims, and the more visibly Muslim you are, the more Robert Jenrick is arguing, because he's not. I don't think he's talking about people who wear other religious garb. I don't think he's talking about Orthodox Jews, for example, or people who wear yarmulkes, or people who wear.
I hope not, because they don't deserve it either.
Well, of course they
don't. But if you look at Muslims all around the world, they're the bottom of the pile at the moment, unless you happen to belong to the Saudi royal family. And so it's an easy target, isn't it? Yeah, yes. You can give the Tories a load of money, but
that helps. You can be the second biggest shareholder in Rupert Murdoch's company until just a few years ago, despite the fact, of course, that Rupert Murdoch was responsible for pumping more Islamophobia into the public bloodstream on both sides of the Atlantic than anyone else in history, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So I just.
So that's all he means. We're being a bit naive.
I think that what they mean is they're trying to get any votes going possible. And, if you look at what happened, whether you love him or hate him with George Galloway, I will blame it on the Muslims. It was a purely Muslim vote. Well, I don't think that down in Norfolk, where I love to holiday a lot, that it's majority white. I don't go around saying, Liz Truss or Theresa Coffey down in Suffolk only got elected because she came in with a purely Muslim white vote.
A purely white vote. I'd never thought of it like that, which is a sign of my privilege. Nobody concludes that Liz Truss keeps getting voted back in, despite some of the really disgusting things she's said and some of the really disgusting people she's hung out with. Whereas Galloway does similarly disgusting things, and it's all the fault of Muslims. So
why can't they vote for him? Why can't they? And look, let's face it, you're not going to go and stand in an area where you're going to get beaten. You want to win, don't you? And so he went there and, love him or hate him, he's like a boomerang. He keeps coming back. And
like an unflushable item.
Well, that's your view and stuff. And
it is my view, and I may play you a little clip later to show you why that is my view. But you've covered enough ground. So you're all right then. He doesn't mean you because you don't look like the daughter of a Muslim man.
And he doesn't mean Suella Braverman because she's probably got money, and he doesn't mean Priti Patel. I think money comes into it, and there's nothing. So when I was in the fire brigade, that's the other thing. When when people say, how can someone like Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, who are kids of immigrants? Well, I worked with some women firefighters, very few, or came across them that did not want to be seen as a woman firefighter. They'd say, I don't mind being called a fireman. Right, and we had big battles about. Look, it's firefighter.
Yeah.
Pretty easy, mate. Just use that instead of picking yourself up a notch by saying firewoman or fireman. But women,
would be on the side of we don't need to change it. We're fine, thank you very much. I used to get calls from women of a certain age who told me they liked having their backsides pinched in the office in the typing pool in the 1950s because they found it flattering. And it's important to be accommodating. Why have you never rung me before?
I have actually ages ago.
What about?
Yeah, I have. No, I listened to you. I listened to you a lot, mate. I want to thank you for
the
Brexit arguments because I've used them.
I should have got royalties. I should have got royalties on those. If I had £1 for every time someone told me that, I would actually have quite a lot of money. God, mind. There you go. That's the perfect start to the conversation because I can't see it like you see it. Not in a million years. The female firefighter, daughter of a Muslim man. Who does Robert Jenrick mean when he talks about you haven't integrated or you can't integrate or there's too many of you? Well, we know that he doesn't mean everybody who wears religious garb. He doesn't mean nuns, does he? Or Franciscan friars or Orthodox Jews. Who does he mean? Who's not integrating? When Farage did it, he meant anyone who speaks foreign on a train. But we think Honest Bob might be a little bit more specific on that, and he just means anyone who's a Muslim. So why wouldn't Sajid Javid be included on that list, I wonder? Perhaps he is. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
I'm enjoying this. I do apologise. I mean, the conversation about TV detectives, it's definitely not, as Scott and others have suggested, the lad from Lewis who wasn't Lewis that is getting a TV reboot, and nor is it Inspector Morse, which is proving very, very popular. But I think you're doing more wishful thinking than reasoning. George Gently's got quite a few votes, which is particularly gratifying because Martin listens to the show most days. Probably not listening today when he's getting all the love. And actually, it's not going to be Kojak having moved to Wolverhampton, although I like the suggestion. And indeed, Sherlock Holmes getting quite a few as well. But I think I've read that is coming to. Coming back at some point. It's just that they're all superstars now, aren't they? They're all massive Hollywood superstars. All of them. They're not just the main two characters. But quite a few are guessing correctly. I won't keep this going all day. I'll definitely close it down before the end of the hour. But a few of you are suggesting, I'm going to give you a little clue now. A few of you are suggesting Shoestring, which starred Trevor Eve, of course. In fact, it's not shoestring, but what a lot of people don't know, I am so boring on this kind of thing. You really would want me in your pub quiz team. A lot of people don't know that the programme I am talking about, the one that is apparently due a reboot, and which if you're anything close to my age, you will be quite excited about, was made as a consequence of Trevor Eve deciding that he didn't want to do shoestring anymore. He didn't want to be tied to the same character in the public consciousness for decades, in the way that I guess John Thaw was with Morse years later. And that's why the show that they're now talking about rebooting with Aidan Turner in the lead character, in the lead role, that's why it came into existence. Same producers. They just needed another show to fill the slot vacated by... I'm sorry. I shall relax a bit now and move back to the more important conversation of the day, which is who is Honest Bob Jenrick talking about? The bloke that thought that processing centres for, and the key word here is either unaccompanied or child, I'll let you decide, unaccompanied child refugees. He's the one that ordered that the murals of cartoon characters be painted over just in case it was all a bit too welcoming for some of the most desperate human beings ever to wash up on these shores. When he talks about there being too much immigration and it's made integration impossible, who's he actually talking about? If he doesn't mean you, who does he mean? Angie's in Ealing. Angie, what would you like to say?
Hello, long-time listener, first-time caller, all
Welcome.
that stuff, and a bit confused because I thought you were going to ask me about detectives there for a moment.
No, don't worry. That's the side order. I've got to give you many reasons to keep listening, Angie. That's the way. It's such a modern world when there's so many demands upon our attention. I try, in my humble way, to meet every single one of them. What made you pick up the phone?
What made me pick up the phone, and I think the lady before answered my sort of your question on my behalf. I think what he thinks he's talking about is our poor brown people who wear headscarves and hang out together. But the reason that I picked up the phone today is that I'm the same age as you, and I probably live 2 miles away from you, right? I live in Ealing, leafy, the white part of Ealing, not the brown part.
I didn't know it was. I didn't know it was distinguished in that way.
Well, there's a richer part, and then there's Southall and those areas, right, that are in the borough of Ealing. So they're two, I suppose, distinct areas. I've got a brown face. Right. I was born here. My parents are Indian professionals, I suppose. Well, retired now. But I spent the 70s being called the P word. Yes. We grew up in Oxfordshire, outside in a village, not in a big conurbation with lots of other brown people. And people that Jenrick's talking to don't differentiate between whether the person with a brown face... This is, I think, the consequence of it. So I don't think he's... Sorry, I'm burbling a bit.
Take all the time you want.
I don't think he's talking about me. I'm a professional. I've got my own business. I'm married to a white guy, right? So are all my siblings. We pay our taxes. No one's been in prison. All that sort of good, in inverted commas, immigrant stuff.
Yes.
But every time they talk about immigrants, and this debate about immigration has been going on for nearly 10 years now, right?
No, it hasn't. You can't. No, excuse me. I read in the Times that you can't have a debate about immigration because of political correctness. So actually, I think you'll find it hasn't gone on at all. We all imagined it. We all imagined that the country has talked about absolutely nothing else since pretty much the moment I actually can remember, because it was political correctness stopping us from having conversations like this.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I must have been on substances.
That's all right, carry on.
All that time. But, this is where I just think this is the side that they don't see, and I don't understand why not. It's people like me, and let's face it, I work in the NHS as well, part-time. If all the brown people in the NHS, or all the immigrants down tools for just one day, this country would fall apart, right? Or anything, London, anywhere. We're all immigrants from somewhere, as the chap said to me.
So he means the ones that look too foreign. Because I've got a story.
I think he means the ones that look too foreign. But sorry to interrupt your story. I know it's not my show.
All the time. Well, it is actually, in a way.
But he doesn't mean the ones that look different and have lots of money, right? So they're bits of London where there are very rich individuals from overseas. Some of them look white, some of them don't. They don't mix with anyone else.
No,
right?
but he doesn't. But he doesn't mean. First time I witnessed that kind of. First time I witnessed full face veils actually was indeed in Knightsbridge and Mayfair when I first moved to London. I'd never seen anything like it before in my life. When I was a tiny little boy, my cousins came over from Lagos because we couldn't go and stay with them. It wasn't safe at the time. So they'd come and stay with us. And then when they hosted us back, we'd stay at a hotel in Knightsbridge for a lad from Kidderminster. It was like I felt like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Angie, when I went to stay at the hotel in Knightsbridge. And my cousin Bodie would charge Arab ladies £1 to touch my flaxen blonde locks. We made a fortune before his dad caught us and chased us both out of the lift. So that, I'd never encountered that kind of, well, I don't know what you'd call it, but you're right. It doesn't mean the rich people who don't, quotes, integrate, end quotes. He means the poor people. Briefly, it's a genie, this, though, because once you get that out of the bottle, as it were, once it's out of the lamp, whether you're Nigel Farage or Honest Bob Jenrick, you don't actually get to control where the forces that you're deliberately unleashing go next. So, at risk of sounding like a lottery advert, it could be you at some point, simply by dint of your brown face.
Yeah, and that's what breaks my heart. Yeah. Really, and that's why I called, right? My kids, they're half brown and half white, but they've got brown faces. They look brown. And now, all of a sudden, like 40 years later, we're back in that situation where someone's going to call them a P word or chase them because they're brown.
And they're going to think that Honest Bob Jenrick has given, rightly or wrongly, they're going to think that he's given them permission to do so. He's blown that dog whistle, as it were.
But let's not, fool ourselves. It's not Jenrick saying that this weekend. They've all been saying it for months and years. And
well, they've been edging towards it, I think, since 2016, actually. Do you know, when I interviewed Farage in 2014 and he had to be dragged out of the studio because he was soiling himself all over the place, and even the Mail and the Sun wrote that up as him being disgraceful. Now they'd write it up as me being disgraceful. That's only 2014. That's 10 years. 10 years to the day. Almost. What
I'd like is for someone of your stature or, with your platform to ask, or not you because they won't talk to you, but some of the others, to say, if a brown person gets beaten up or, a brick through their window or whatever else it is, do you think you're responsible?
Yeah.
That's what I'd like to ask, because that's the end of all of this.
Well, of course, right? We're not responsible. We didn't mean you. we meant the other ones over there. You've reminded me, actually, of the first time I encountered somebody who couldn't speak English, someone who'd been here for a while and had come originally from Pakistan, not from India. But it was a pal of mine's mum in Manchester, and we went to pick him up. It was during our clubbing days. We went to pick him up, and my mate who was driving said, "Can you go and get him? Because I don't want to talk to his mum." And I said, "Well, why don't you want to talk to his mum?" And he said, "Well, she doesn't really speak English, so it's an absolute nightmare trying to get him in and out of the house. And she's ever so lovely." And I had two thoughts. I thought, crikey, I've never come across that before. We'd be going back to about 1991. And second, I just felt really sorry for her. I just thought, there's so much you won't be able to do. There's so much you won't be able to avail yourself of. So much of it. This is before, you've got a multiplicity of foreign language television channels. So I think Honest Bob Jenrick maybe means people like her, until you tell him that her husband owned a garment factory in Manchester, employed about 200 people. His son went to the grammar school, the fee-paying grammar school, and was destined for a life of success and commerce, whatever it is the Tories claim to value this week. And so what if Mum hasn't integrated, but Dad has? Who'd you send back then, Honest Bob, I wonder? 10:43 is the time. Savash is in Catford. Savash, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Yeah, thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Your callers have been pretty confusing me this morning, going backwards and forth of what I've actually been thinking. But can I just tell you my gut feeling, what it was, when I heard your question?
Yeah, of course you can.
So basically what it is, it comes from my gut. I kind of feel it's like they do mean me. Right. And
Why?
Just from... because I kind of hear it and experience it in different ways. Maybe because because I'm half Turkish Cypriot. I'm born and bred in London, and
right.
My dad and my family come over from Cyprus like in the 50s and 60s, and I just hear it in different ways. I've obviously got a London and British accent, that because of my name, Savash. They see it once they hear it or they say it. It's always like, oh, Savash, and oh, I don't mean you, but I think they do. That's my gut from it, and it's just.
Well, I mean, I don't know what to say to you, because I want to say I don't think they do. But A, that sounds a bit ridiculous, and B, how the hell do I know? I don't know who they mean. And you clearly don't wear a face veil. I think it pretty obviously he means people who wear a face veil. But what if?
Yeah.
What if your wife does? And what if, as I say, my friend's mum didn't speak English, and yet his dad was one of the biggest employers in their part of Manchester? So who do they mean? Who do they mean? And if you think they mean you, that's bad enough, isn't it? That's bad enough.
Yeah. It's just you just have that feeling in there, and I've had it before when I've had to like kind of do you know I've experienced it a few years ago. It was like a family friend who was in the pub somewhere during those weird COVID times, and everyone was allowed out again in the pub and all that kind of stuff. It was outside, and I heard it. It was just like, "Oh, you're all right. You're all right. You're okay. Your name's all right."
We don't mean you.
No, it just goes round in circles that way, and it's only when it just kind of clicks in you. It's just the casualness of it, and it just takes you, and especially listening to programs like yours, James, just hearing the other callers. It's like it kind of feels like, oh man, I'm not in the same boat. It's like it just kind of justifies your feelings more and more and validates how you're feeling inside.
And then it seems to be seeping ever closer to the mainstream. So even 10 years ago, the right-wing media was keen to consign Nigel Farage to the dustbin where he so obviously belonged. Now you've got honest Bob Jenrick, who was a Home Office minister until not that long ago. All of these former Home Office ministers complaining about the immigration system that they have been in charge of for most of the last 14 years is extraordinary. Well, I mean, as a party for all of the last 14 years, but in the cases of Braverman and honest Bob, they're literally in charge. It was literally their job. They had overall control for immigration, and they're complaining about it. I don't know what to say to Savage. My natural impulse is to reassure people, and in some cases I could do that. I could say to Savage, "No, they don't mean Turkish Cypriots, mate. They don't mean you." But what do they? I could say to Angie, "They don't mean you. They don't. They mean them over there." But then you remember Farage complaining about people talking foreign on trains, and you think, "Oh, they might mean you if you might be French." You might be Polish. Yeah, whether you're speaking Polish or Gujarati, it doesn't matter, does it? It's foreign. So that's next. If you can't define who they're actually maligning, the next thing you won't be able to define is what they mean by British values. But they're just going to decide who displays them and who doesn't. Attacking the NHS during the COVID that Savage just referred to, lining up to attack the NHS. That GBB station has always got loads of white people on it, attacking one of the finest institutions that this country has ever created. Are they maligning British values, or can you only do that if you're brown?
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:51 is the time. Have you got it now? Do you think I should play the actual theme tune rather than do my... No, of course not. That would be predictable and derivative. I shall do my own interpretations, possibly next time using the medium of modern dance. Interpretive dance. So Bergerac, they say Bergerac's coming back with Aidan Turner in the lead role, obviously vacated not long ago after he somehow got promoted and changed his name to Barnaby and became Midsummer Murders. So Bergerac, and also anyone of my age will know John Nettles was a supreme Shakespearean actor because he always popped up in the dramatisations of RSC, Royal Shakespeare Company plays that you'd get shown on those wonderful, wonderful days at school when the teacher announced you were going to watch a play on telly. And you just think, oh, fantastic, feet up, take it easy. John Nettles is a superb actor. I think he retired, didn't he, when he got to the end of the road, replaced by the inimitable and brilliant Neil Dudgeon. You see, I told you I knew far too much about TV detective dramas, which reminds me, I must check in on old Ralph Little, actually. We were watching Death in Paradise last night. So Bergerac, they say Bergerac is coming back with Aidan Turner in the role, and Bergerac only came into existence after Trevor Reeve decided that he didn't want to... carry on playing shoestring. Do you know what came second? That was the Sweeney, wasn't it? That wasn't Bergerac. What's Bergerac then? Go on, sing it to me. Shall I ambush a caller to see if they can do the Bergerac thing? Why did I do the Sweeney? It must be similar because I've got no musical knowledge. I've got no musical nous, you see. So I can't. I tried to do Bergerac. In my head, I heard Bergerac then, but you heard Sweeney. That's how bad I am. You know, when you meet someone who says, I could teach anyone to sing, I always quietly think to myself, no, you couldn't, mate. No, you couldn't. Anyway, we digress slightly. Let's get back to that's the Sweeney theme tune. Let's get back to the big question. Who is Honest Bob Jenrick talking about? I got a lovely text saying, why does James keep referring to Robert Jenrick as Honest Bob? Does he not know that he was implicated in a potential property scandal some years ago? I said, yes, I do. It's sarcasm. Obviously, if you have to explain it, it's probably not working. But generally speaking, if you call a politician Honest Joe or Honest John or Honest Bob, it's sarcasm because you're suggesting that they're anything but. So who is Honest Bob Jenrick talking about when he swings at immigrants in general? And how do you know it's not you? Lana's in Cardiff. Lana, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Big fan.
Thanks. That's very
for
kind.
taking my call. Basically, I've been in Cardiff for quite a while now, I think 18 years.
Yes.
And you wouldn't say that I'm an immigrant unless I start talking to you. So I'm Caucasian white.
Yes.
But I remember it was the next day after the election when the UKIP got quite good results. I think it was, I'm not sure what year it was anyway. And I bumped into
2014
yes,
perhaps. It's not a great phone line, Lana, so I don't know. I mean, do carry on, but I'm just warning you, it's not brilliant.
Yes, okay, I'll try. And I bumped into my neighbours, and I asked how did they vote, and they said, UKIP, of course, we're the immigrants. And I didn't say anything, but I just looked at her, and she said immediately, I don't mean you, darling. You pay taxes, don't you?
So, and all the ones that don't pay taxes, your neighbour knows precisely none of them, I presume. She's just read about them in the Daily Mail.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but I know that they don't work themselves. So, ironically, but there you are.
So when you hear a senior politician, increasingly, a member of the Conservative Party rather than a member of UKIP, when they start talking about you're not integrating, how can you be confident that he doesn't mean you?
I'm not confident at all. I was telling to your colleague that I'm quite privileged because I work in academia, so I don't really bump into racists all the time. But this jumping the queue thing...
jumping the queue, of course, yeah.
I came here and by government program, high-skilled migrant program, I do contribute to the economy. I love the country, but it's just not fair when they talk like that.
No, well, and I mean, then we ask the question of who they do mean. And as you remind us, it's quite possible the people shouting loudest about spongers or whatever the rhetoric of the day is, don't tend to look a little bit closer to home when they're trying to identify drains upon the public purse. I mean, this is probably a good point to remind you. Thank you, Lana. A good point to remind you that there are two reasons behind this sort of rhetoric. The first and most obvious is the pursuit of the votes of the kind of people that were persuaded to vote for Brexit. And as you know, I'm not very patient with people who like to malign everyone in that constituency as being stupid or racist or both. My catchphrase since 2016 has been contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned. If you voted for Brexit for a whole heap of reasons, you now know 8 years later that those things have not happened. If you're clinging to the idea that they might have done, well, I've got a bridge that I'd like to sell you. But I don't like the lazy generalisation. The people who don't perhaps deserve compassion anymore would be the people whose opinions are loosely described as a bit gammony. So that's option number one. Honest Bob Jenrick is pursuing that vote, which is probably, unfortunately, the Conservative Party membership these days. And just like Kemi Badenoch and Liz Truss before them, they understand that they're the only votes that really matter if you want to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. So that's not a massive mystery. The second bit of it, and I never know how complicit politicians like Honest Bob are in this process. I've had two brilliant interviews on Full Disclosure in the last 2 weeks to the purpose of this. One with Bernie Sanders and one with Gary Stevenson. So Bernie Sanders, former American presidential candidate, Gary Stevenson, former city whiz kid, who is now an inequality campaigner. And the one point that they drive home, and like me, just believe the whole world would be different if you could get this understood more widely, is that the rich, and by rich I mean mad rich, they're now moving in on government and middle class. You know, if your only reason for being on this earth is to accrue more and more money, there's none left with the poor. There's no money left. The poor haven't got any money. There's a story today about the number of fast food billboards that are in the poorest parts of town. They're sucking all the money they can out of the poor, whether it's, fixed odds betting terminals, junk food, payday loans. They were very popular for a while. There's no money left. The poor haven't got any money anymore. There's no point trying to suck the marrow out of what's left of their bones. So they're coming after government, local, national government, and they're coming after the middle classes. The councils that are going bankrupt are going to have to start selling assets. Who's going to buy them? The people who've already got all the money. So I don't know that Honest Bob Jenrick is a conscious part of this process, but you cannot sustain the levels of inequality that we currently have. And you certainly can't sign people up to make them even worse. You can't sign the middle class up to impoverish themselves so that the richest people in the world can get even richer without persuading them that they're actually under threat. The real threat is coming from, let's get the quote right, the beneficiaries of mass migration who are incapable of integrating. Yes, they're the real threat. So understand that, and actually it all makes sense. Scottish politics next.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:03 is the time. I don't like doing little snatches of music on the programme. I think it all sounds a bit North Norfolk digital, but I am tempted to get Another One Bites the Dust from Queen onto the whatever it's called, the button thing that Keith and Adam press. What's it called, Adam? Does it have a name? It's just a button. I told you, I know all the technical terms, because another one's gone now. Paul Scully has revealed that he's going to quit as an MP before the general election, saying that he's lost focus, and he was disappointed not to have been chosen as his party's mayoral candidate. Unfortunately for Paul Scully, at this point, I would have made a joke about not having enough anti-immigration views, or not being racist enough, and losing out to Susan Hall, the Donald Trump fan. But of course, Paul Scully has subsequently started talking gibberish about no-go areas. So maybe he just didn't show enough ankle to whoever it is that selects the Tory mayoral candidate. But he's off as well. So if I did do lazy musical snatches in order to make fairly clumsy points on air, I would now play a bit of Another One Bites the Dust by Queen. What I could do now is sing it to you and accidentally sing Killer Queen instead, or We Are the Champions, because I tried to sing you the Bergerac theme tune a few minutes ago and accidentally sang the Sweeney. And I still can't in my head. Thank you to everyone who's been in touch to tell me it goes like this, James. Nee, 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 nee. I hope I'm reading that correctly. So just for anyone else who's going to have a really irritating, what's the opposite of an earworm? An ear hole. It's going to have an ear hole, an earworm hole. Like where an earworm should be, but you've got a hole instead. Here is the original and the actual. So two New Year's resolutions that I made several years ago. One was to start covering Scottish, Northern Irish, and even perhaps one day Welsh politics a little bit more accurately than I have done in the past, a little more enthusiastically than I have done in the past. And the other was to pay a little bit more attention to my texts. I'm going to do both now. Here are two texts, just to close down the conversation we had in the last hour about Honest Bob Jenrick's appeal. Racist dog whistle, really, puffing away on his little racist dog whistle, bless him. Two texts that really closed the conversation down. Perfect punctuation mark for what was a very important phone in. Listen to this. One from Kieran and one from Joanna. Kieran first. All I hear is, I don't mean you yet. So I'm asking, if you've just tuned in, I'm asking, who was Honest Bob Jenrick talking about when he said that immigrants can't integrate? Immigrants don't integrate. Who was he talking about? All I hear is, says Kieran, I don't mean you yet. Because if the ones they do mean go away, or if things get a little bit tougher, I know that they will mean me. So just hold that in mind. and then hear what Joanna in East Finchley has to say. Joanna says, I think it's a massive mistake to assume that they only mean the people who look different or sound different, James. The Jewish community in Nazi Germany probably thought that the fully integrated Jewish community in Nazi Germany was safe. A racist means everyone who does not look like them, including Sunak, Braverman and Patel. Don't be fooled. Would they really accept more Christian West Indians? ? Answer, says Joanna in East Finchley. No. And finally, just while I'm dealing with some housework, I didn't get John Nettles mixed up with John Thompson, you prune. John Nettles was Bergerac. John Thompson was the jazz show host on The Fast Show who took the mickey out of the genre by wearing a black polo neck, turning direct to camera and saying things like, nice, which you can only really enjoy in full effect if you catch up with this show later on YouTube, because I did that right down the barrel of the camera. 8 minutes after 11. And so that's one New Year's resolution dealt with, paying a little bit more attention to the text than I have done for the last 20 years. Now I'm going to turn to Scottish politics. I managed to upset my SNP fans a couple of weeks ago, and I don't mean that in a patronising or a facetious way. I didn't fully appreciate the historical context of Lindsay Hoyle's decision to accept the Labour amendment for a vote in the House of Commons as opposed to the SNP's original motion. It looked to me like a hissy fit. You schooled me. I was wrong. I'm grateful for that education. I really am. And conscious of needing still to have a much deeper understanding of the history of Scottish politics, Scottish nationalism, really, in particular. The deputy leader of the SNP. This is really interesting, but it is one of those topics. They don't come up very often. It's one of those topics where you're going to know a hell of a lot more than I do. And when I say they don't come up very often, I mean the ones that are about politics and opinions rather than the ones that are about experiences. If we're doing a phone-in based on experiences, particularly experiences that I won't have because I'm a bloke or because I'm white or because I'm not skinned or whatever it might be, then obviously you know a hell of a lot more about it than I do. We talk about being on the receiving end of misogyny. You know a hell of a lot more about it than I do. So this is about political opinions. And crucially on the programme, it's about understanding the opinions. So I don't just want to know what you think, I want to know why you think it. Because Keith Brown, who is the deputy leader of the SNP, has referred to that episode I just mentioned, the treatment of his party over that Gaza ceasefire debate. And if there were proof needed of the seriousness of that episode, the seriousness that I failed to appreciate, but I'm not going to start self-flagellating or dress in sackcloth and ashes. I've said sorry. I've admitted I got it horribly wrong, and I've moved on. But if you need proof of how serious it is for SNP members and supporters, then know this. The deputy leader of the SNP has said it's time to think about pulling our MPs out of Westminster altogether. He wants a debate on the case for withdrawing its MPs from Westminster. And again, I hesitate to offer up pungent opinions because my last one was so wrong. But this is clearly a very big deal, potentially, a very, very big deal. He wants this debate following what he describes as those shambolic events in Parliament where the SNP were deprived of a vote and indeed also deprived of a later debate over a ceasefire in Gaza. It was like a double whammy when Lindsay Hoyle broke convention in the Commons by allowing that amendment to be brought forward. And then, well, hopes or promises that another debate would be held were then failed to materialise. He told a Scottish newspaper that tradition whereby Westminster sidelines, marginalises or suppresses Scotland is not new. A deft conflation there of the SNP with the whole of Scotland, but in a sense that's what nationalism does, isn't it? And that's what nationalism is all about. And by nationalism I mean independence, not the kind of nationalism that leads in the other direction, a belief that you are somehow superior to somebody else because of where you were born. He also added, given the diet democracy of the UK, by which he means sort of democracy light, and the denial of democracy to Scotland, it seems we now need to examine whether it is right to confer any legitimacy on an institution determined to deny democracy in Scotland. So, the deputy leader of the SNP is suggesting that the SNP, currently the third largest party in the House of Commons, withdraw its members from that place. The precedent for it, as you probably already know, would be Sinn Féin, who refused to sit in the House of Commons despite having been democratically elected to it because they were dedicated to a united Ireland. I have no clue on this. I don't generally like starting phone-ins with an admission of complete ignorance, partly because I should know more than I do usually, but on this occasion I'm going to give myself a break because I don't think that you can have a particularly strong opinion on this unless you are particularly passionate about Scottish independence in particular and Scottish domestic politics in general. So here are the questions I would like you to answer, okay? Here are the questions I would like you to answer. I mean, the most obvious one is do you think this is a good idea? Would you like to see the SNP withdraw its MPs from Westminster? I think you need to be in the game to have an opinion that's interesting on that. You need to be Scottish and heavily invested from one side or the other in the independence question. Because the second question I will ask you if you do ring in is this. Would this help or hinder the independence cause? In your opinion, Ken Brown obviously believes that it would massively help the independence cause. Keith Brown obviously believes on some level that it would massively help the independence cause. I don't completely see why. We would talk a lot less about the SNP if Stephen Flynn wasn't the second leader to get up at PMQs every Wednesday and usually score some palpable hits on both the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party. But that's me being Westminster-centric. Maybe that has no bearing at all on moving the needle for the next Scottish independence referendum, whenever that may be. But what would it mean? What would it mean? Not just for Scottish politics, but for British politics as well, if the SNP were not sitting in the House of Commons. All right? I want to try, he says vainly, I want to try to avoid having a different phone-in. I phone in about Scottish independence. I don't want to have a phone-in about Scottish independence today because I want to have a phone-in about the prospect of the SNP pulling its MPs out of Westminster. I want to know whether you want to see that and why. And I want to know what it would do to the prospects, the hopes, the dreams of Scottish independence and or British politics in general. Because I'll tell you what my feeling is. Every time I tell you why, as an English person, I am not a passionate pro-independence advocate for Scotland. You accuse me of just wanting Scotland to stay part of the United Kingdom because I have some nice holidays there. I've never said that. Listen, do what I do for a living. You're going to get misrepresented left, right, and centre. It is my emotional response to the question. I'm pretty sure now that if I was Scottish, I'd be pro-independence, but I'm not, and I don't want to see my country break up. That's all, and I don't want to have that argument today either. I'm just explaining that that's where I come from, and I think that I have a sort of similar feeling with regard to the SNP leaving Westminster. I think Westminster would be the poorer for not having the SNP there, particularly oddly in the last year or so when Stephen Flynn's done such a bang-up job in the chamber. So I don't think that matters and I don't think it counts, but I think it's important to tell you where I'm coming from. So the reason why I am loosely supportive of the union is because I'm in it and I want it to stay like it was before. And the reason why I am cautiously supportive or cautiously opposed to the idea of the SNP taking its members out of Westminster is because I think Westminster would lose as a consequence of that decision. Although if I was a Scottish independence supporter, of course, I couldn't care less about that. So that's enough of my views. Tell me yours. 0345 6060 973. And is there a possibility, while I fully acknowledge the significance and the importance and the historical context of what Lindsay Hoyle did to the SNP a couple of weeks ago, would this be an overreaction on the part of the party and look a bit like, to outsiders, taking your ball home because you didn't get the result that you wanted?
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11 is the time. Make of this what you will. But one of the former producers of this programme is kind of in the news today because she was the journalist so viciously maligned on GBBs by the lad from Lewis who wasn't Lewis. But I've actually booked a different former producer of this programme to come on shortly because it is, as you just heard in the bulletins, the 200th anniversary of the RNLI. And having failed to rescue this programme from oblivion, one of my former producers went on to become an RNLI volunteer, so I thought he'd be a really good person to talk to today to mark that 200th anniversary. He also happens to be a lovely bloke. So do stand by for that. 21 after 11 is the time. SNP thinking of pulling their MPs out of Westminster, or at least their deputy leader says it's time to think about doing that. Just explain it to me. And obviously do so through the lens of whether you think it's a good idea or not. Let's start with Liz, who's in Strathpeffer. Liz, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hiya. So, if you'd asked me this a few years ago, I probably would have said, and I am an SNP member, I'm an elected member in the local council, I would have said, no, we need them there. And the reason for that is my family are European, we're international. These matters are all reserved. We had no voice over that in Holyrood. Ian Blackford was my MP, and I was so grateful that he stood up time and time again and spoke in my behalf. But then I watched him being laughed at, I watched him being ridiculed.
That was largely during Boris Johnson's period of leadership. I appreciate it didn't begin and end with that, but I think Parliament went to a fairly low place for obvious reasons during that period, from which it can return, Liz, is all I'm saying.
I don't have any faith in Westminster. I think they are now using the Westminster powers to overrule decisions we made in Scotland. We passed the GRR here, cross-party. Yeah. We passed legislation to recycle, plastics. Now, the only reason that was passed because we couldn't possibly do it in Scotland, and that, if they hadn't done it in England, there was no other reason for that. We've now got shops here that have the machines put in to recycle that are not being used.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. So there was that. We also passed. We wanted to incorporate the rights of the child into Scottish law, and we couldn't do that because if we did that, it would make the two-child cap, which is mitigated in Scotland, but it would make it illegal if we passed it into law because you couldn't say one child's got more rights than another. So we've had to go back. Emma Roddick, who is our Minister for Equalities, had to go back and look at that, and we had to do huge mitigations to pass the rights of children into Scottish law because Westminster stopped it. And I've just had enough, James.
You explained it incredibly well. Before we get on to last week, just to be clear, but I understand you properly, in the context of devolution and or independence, legislatively speaking or logistically speaking, you see no point in having MPs in Westminster, full stop.
Not anymore.
No,
not
okay,
now.
I get that.
For a long time,
I get that. Now on to next week. On to last week. What happened and why that changed things for you?
It was just the last straw. It was opposition day. We know that Westminster is set up for binary parties. We know that because it's first past the post, smaller parties have no voice. We know that in Westminster. So we in Scotland have to sit and wait. If England votes Labour, we've had Labour in the past, but we're too small. We've got less now because they'd have moved two of our constituencies, 8 of Wales, and England have got an additional 10. So it's a numbers game.
So what do you lose by not being there? And I know you don't think you need to be there anymore, but is there anything that you might lose? Because I won't talk about... I don't talk about Scottish politics enough, arguably, but without the weekly reminder of the SNP and the parliamentary quality that Stephen Flynn in particular now provides, I think you're going to beep even less on our radar, but that, of course, may not matter at all.
We may do, but has that mattered? Has that changed anything? We just got told we're grievance mongering, and I think the thing that I worried that we might lose is I also work part-time for an MSP, so a member of the Scottish Parliament, and I work very closely with the local MP, who is Ian Blackford. Now, that is non-political, it's casework. So when people come to us, and they might come about, if they come about the NHS, or they come about schools, they come about devolved matters, about justice, the MSPs have fast tracks into all these public bodies, and they can take up cases for people. When it comes to reserved matters, so the Post Office, Defence, immigration is the big one, it is the MPs that take that forward. Now, they can still do that, whether they're sitting in Westminster or not. What they did in Westminster was... It was a show, it was the visual thing that they're there, and it did mean a lot to me during Brexit because it ripped my whole family apart, pulled the ground out from underneath me. And it was good to have that voice, these voices.
So it's not binary. You can see some downsides to it, but they're not big enough to overshadow the plus sides. What do you say to the observation that you're essentially calling for the SNP not to be in the Parliament that makes decisions on reserved matters? It seems a bit self-defeating.
Our vote doesn't count anyway. Our vote, we've only got, even if every single Scottish constituency voted SNP, are we 57 seats now in a parliament of over 600?
But as a progressive party, in alliance with other progressive parties on reserved matters, you may get your way. But if you're not there, it becomes considerably less likely.
I don't see anywhere where we've got our way.
No,
I don't really see anywhere where
answer.
it's made a difference. I don't, I think it's... The only thing that I felt made a big difference was following Theresa May's hostile immigration thing. Now, I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but I had an immigration issue with my family, and it was very difficult, to talk about it. And it was only when we got the 56 MPs that they stood up, and one after another they talked about very similar issues that I'd
So
had.
you focus the attention of Westminster on a Scottish matter by dint of being in Westminster. I'm not hurrying you. I'm just conscious of a lot of other people who want to contribute to this conversation, and that is quite a big deal, but not big enough. To be absolutely clear, I'm fully conscious of the fact that the independence movement lost the last referendum. Please don't think for a minute I'm confining this conversation to Scottish people in favour of independence or committed to it. But I don't know what I mean. And ring me and tell me what you think about the prospect of SNP MPs leaving Westminster. As someone who wants the union to sustain, do you think that is good or bad for your cause? It's perfectly possible you think this is great news for unionists because it means that the voices of nationalists will be quietened on the... I can't say the national stage. I always say my country when I mean the United Kingdom, or I don't. Obviously, in the context of Scottish politics, it sounds like I mean England, but I don't. I don't want my what country, nation, country, whatever. I don't want the United. Anyway, you want it to stay together, and therefore you have a view on what SNP MPs leaving Westminster might mean. Tony's in Greenock. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I caveat with what's just been said by your previous caller. I would agree with most of what she says, but where I would disagree is to say that I think there's value in the MPs staying where they are. And albeit they might not get listened to, albeit they might get ridiculed and they might get...
Just on that, briefly, doesn't everyone get ridiculed in the House of Commons?
Yeah, well, everyone does, but I think the point I'm trying to make, that it helps the sense of grievance that the SNP needs to have to say, look how bad it is down here. Look how we are treated by our English neighbours.
This is 3D chess, isn't it, Tony? This is the 3D chess reading of the situation.
But because I think if they take that away, the fact that they're left with how they're doing locally in Scotland as a governing party. And to be honest with you, for a lot of people, including myself, in many areas, the jury is out on that. They've done a lot of good things. There are a lot of good things. Free prescriptions. There's a lot of childcare things that we get up here that aren't available nationwide. But talking to friends, education, people in education, very disappointed with the SNP. So if they fight locally on how they've done as a government in Scotland, I don't think the support would be there. But what I think they need is that the representatives down in Parliament to say, well, look, here's the alternative. You stay with this crowd. They don't give a about us.
Because I'm imagining myself being in the constituency you describe, and I would be completely susceptible to this. Oh, look, they're not doing a great job on this, that, or the other, but look at the way they treat us down in Westminster.
Yeah.
I'm indie till I die. Completely works. That's how do you know what you've done? I said 3D chess. It was a bit patronising. You've gone human rather than political, haven't you? You've gone pure human.
First person to say that to me for a while.
But it's true, though, isn't it? It's like I'm trying to persuade you to vote for independence. You're saying, look at the state of my kid's school, and I'm saying, well, look at how they treat us down in Westminster. Why do you want? What is it the Proclaimers sang? I won't understand why you let someone else rule your land cap in hand, and that's what it looks like when you point at the way that
it comes from the table, really.
Yes.
And I kind of play a long game with this to think, independence might be the short-term goal, but long-term, the SNP might not be the party that governs the country.
True.
Yeah, no, it will not be a one-party state, because Labour, the Tories and Liberals, they'll all be there in some form or another. Whether and
there'll be a massive recalibration as well of Scottish politics, and you'll have movements, as you say, coming from quite long and rich traditions of both Scottish and British politics, having to recalibrate and rejig and coming back into the political fray completely. I'm using a lot of re's in this analysis, but completely refreshed. Thank you, Tony. That's really strong. I try that one on for size. And speaking of 3D chess and politics, I'm looking at the latest polls, which have Labour 27 points ahead. Emoji sarcasm, hashtag quotes, fingers, all right? Any other leader would be 30 points ahead, wouldn't they? Hey? Do you see what I did there? I'm joking. And the Tories are on 20%. But thinking of the argument that the poll lead might cause apathy and not be good for Labour, I'm going to explain to you in a minute why in the course of the last 15 minutes I've begun to think that the opposite might be true. I'll tell you why after the very latest headlines with Thomas Watts.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to read you something. I found it amazingly because I remember needing to read this at the time, and I'm going back now to 2018, almost to the day actually, March 2018, the 6th of March 2018. It really is almost to the day. But it was when some of us thought that Sinn Féin might move in and undermine Theresa May's relatively tiny majority when she was sowing the seeds for the disasters of Brexit, some of which were avoidable, although they became completely unavoidable when she did her red lines and committed herself also to the abolition of freedom of movement. But a Sinn Féin MP, Paul Maskey, wrote a great piece back then, 6 years ago, under the headline, "This is why I won't go to Westminster, even over Brexit." And I think it gives food for thought to Scottish nationalists like our first caller, Liz, who support Keith Brown's suggestion that it's time to think about withdrawing your MPs from Westminster. Listen to this. To the British public, it may seem strange to stand for election to an institution and then refuse to participate in that institution. For British citizens with a progressive worldview and those with an anti-Brexit disposition, it might appear logical to take these seats. And for British MPs, that is entirely logical because the Westminster Parliament is the democratic institution that makes decisions on behalf of the British people. And then he reminds us that, of course, the history of Sinn Féin's refusal to partake in Westminster politics is because of their commitment to Irish republicanism. They're not going to abandon the Irish Republican principle of abstentionism in any circumstances whatsoever, because it is a raison d'etre for the entire Sinn Féin party. But it doesn't apply to the SNP, does it? My parallel was, I think, justified but clumsy, because the Westminster Parliament is the democratic institution that makes decisions on behalf of the British people. So why would you not be in it to help make those decisions to the benefit of the people you represent? James is in Glasgow. James, what do you reckon?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to speak to you, Paul. I think you're
Likewise.
a different classmate.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Just regarding what the SNP, I'm an SNP voter myself, but only after 2014 I became an SNP voter. I've been Labour all my life. I just feel as if we've maybe jumped the gun by saying this. I think we should maybe wait until we can get as much MPs as possible in the next general election, which God willing will be maybe the middle of the year, but I think it'll be the end of the year.
Yeah, same.
Try and get as much MPs as possible in, and then we can maybe make that step, get into, God willing, the next year.
Good chicken and egg, though, isn't it? Because I think you're probably more vulnerable in terms of numbers in this year's election than you were in 2019, certainly, or 2017. The Labour Party has made enormous strides in Scotland since Keir Starmer became leader. Just looking at polls, and you know what polls...
You're right, James, they have, but I think Labour's more made strides in the local elections and with our local parliament, with Scottish Parliament, forgive me, and local council elections. I think when it comes to the big election, I think that's when the people who have voted Labour in their local elections will turn back to the SNP because they see how the SNP is treated. I listen to yourself all the time, but I listen to Prime Minister's questions, and any time a Scottish politician talks, it's like carnage within Parliament, and it's horrible to listen to. And I get it, everybody gets the kind of same treatment, but it feels as if we get it worse. I just feel as if we're not respected for how we're speaking. And understand my accent's very strong. Even our local MP, David Linden, there was one time he was speaking in Parliament, and he was asked to repeat what he said 3 or 4 times by a Conservative politician, and I think the guy was just actually doing
it on purpose.
I really do, James, and I feel we don't feel as if we're getting... I would love to hold my government to account, and no matter how Scotland votes, and I know, sorry, that's a different conversation, but matter how Scotland votes, we never get to hold the government we voted to account. Look, we always voted Labour since I think it was 1957.
Yeah.
We voted Labour, and then we started voting SNP. We just want a proper voice, and we're just not getting respect.
So what you've done here, I think perfectly, is demarcate the distinction between grievance and tactic, because the grievance seems to me to be fair and very well explained by you and by other callers. But you haven't sold me the tactic. This might make you feel better, or it might seem like a just response to the unfair treatment that SNP MPs get in Westminster, whether it's the behaviour of the idiot you describe, demanding that your MP repeat himself countless times, or whether it is the disrespect shown to the SNP by Lindsay Hoyle. All of that can be true, but it still doesn't make withdrawing a good idea if you're prioritising, for example, independence above all else.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the better idea is to try and send as
many back as possible. Yes.
If you can send over 40 again down to Westminster, I think then you can go, right, if there's any of this again, we're just pulling them out.
But why would they? Why? I mean, who wouldn't want that, though? Do you see what I mean? It's like you'd make a threat, and the worst thing that can happen when you make a threat, it's like when your little one says, well, exactly. When your little one says they're going to run away, and you say, "Oh, I'll go and pack a bag for you," and all of the wind disappears from their sails, doesn't it?
What happens now? Yeah, you're right.
But we may find out. Who knows? We may find out. It's an interesting intervention, though, and for me at least, an unexpected one. Thank you, James. Thomas is in Fife. Thomas, what would you like to say?
I don't believe, James, that the SNP MPs should be withdrawn from Westminster. British politics has moved ever further to the right, and the SNP are on the left of that line. It would be a bad idea for Scotland if they withdrew, because then Westminster would be able to trample all over the devolution settlement, and we would have policies imposed upon us, but without being able to offer any meaningful opposition to them. The other thing I think about withdrawing MPs that's bad from a UK perspective is because the SNP are on the left, those people who feel disenfranchised down south will not be aware of what could happen in a more fairly governed society.
Yes.
Whilst, take for instance our NHS, it's far from ideal.
Sure.
However, many reports have shown that it outperforms the NHS in other parts of the UK. the SNP's childcare policy, the additional childcare payment, has lifted more children out of poverty as a proportion of the population.
You're campaigning, Thomas. This is not relevant at all to the question of whether or not the MP should leave Westminster.
If they withdraw from Westminster, then people south of the border who do not benefit from services such as these will not be made aware of them and will not be able to lobby their
for
MP,
similar treatment.
Elected.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I agree with you. So it's a good point, but I don't know why I, for example, would be prevented from saying to a Westminster politician, well, it works in Scotland. Also, strikes and industrial action. We don't do it enough, do we? We don't often enough say, when they start talking about England and Wales, we should remind them more often, well, they've come to an arrangement in Scotland. They've come to a settlement in Scotland. Why can't you? I don't know that having SNP MPs in Westminster makes that more or less effective or likely.
Well, when you consider the treatment of politics in the UK through the mainstream media, the SNP in Scottish politics are predominantly viewed negatively. And it's this thing about where would you be without, the block grant, with the grievance thing. I don't believe the SNP should be playing on the grievance. I think they should celebrate it, because that highlights...
And use Westminster to remind voters what Scottish people have that English and Welsh voters don't have. But
should have.
This is the great conundrum, isn't it, though, of progressive politics in Westminster, and it's something Stephen Flynn has driven home, I think, more effectively than anyone in the SNP in my lifetime, whether they've been based in Holyrood or Westminster or neither, and that is that, of course, the Labour Party is his enemy, at least as much as the Tory party is. And so, you're right. It would be effectively saying to Labour supporters, why haven't you got what we've had? But it wouldn't be coming from a position of alliance or allegiance. It would still be coming from a position of enmity. Whereas if you're not there, you're not coming from any position at all. Thank you, Thomas. I don't know now. I think the consensus leans towards there's not a lot to be gained from leaving, except... I'm going to choose my words quite carefully, more carefully than I usually do, but except a very valid and comprehensible sense that eventually you've got to do something to register your disgust at the way that you're treated. But as we touched upon, the danger is that you end up being a bit, I don't want to say taking your ball home, but you do make a threat that the person you're threatening is not that fussed by. In which case, what on earth is achieved?
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51 is the time, and you know what a fan I am of things that take your breath away, but not in the sense of, shocking apocalyptic discoveries, things that have been under your nose all of your life that you didn't know about, or that you didn't know everything about. So a bit like, I don't know, discovering a secret family or something like that your next door neighbour's got. But I mean something that you can't quite believe you never knew before. And I have to be honest with you, it's only relatively recently that I discovered that the RNLI is staffed almost entirely by volunteers. In fact, I read it on... The kind of tourist information placard at North Berwick, just outside the RNLI station there, which has a very long and proud history. They also used to do this thing called rocketeering, where you'd fire a rocket towards distressed seamen, and so that they would reach them and they'd grab it and you'd haul them in from the sea. There's something else I learned in North Berwick. Do you know what else I learned in North Berwick? The king, one of the Jameses, went to pick up his bride on the continent, and when they were coming back, there were so many storms that he blamed it on witches and started burning people when he got back to Britain. I digress slightly, because when I saw that today was the 200th anniversary of the RNLI, I was reminded of a former colleague and friend of mine who, after working on this show, decided to go off and do something more useful instead, and actually signed up to become an RNLI volunteer. So I thought we'd catch up with him today rather than sort of go through the press office or talk to the chief executive or do all of the sort of normal grown-up things that a normal grown-up radio programme would do on a day like today. I speak of Michael Keown, who was, as I say, very formerly of this parish and who signed up for the RNLI about 3 years ago. And I'll begin, Michael, if I may, by asking why. What prompted you to do that? Where did the idea come from?
It had been in the family, James. So my father-in-law, Martin, effectively, his dad was in the crew over at Sheerness. And on the wall above where we often had our Christmas dinners and other family events was this picture of the lifeboat going out to Radio Caroline, a trade that we both know as, originally starting radio. And from that moment, I was always intrigued as to just how my life in radio could be related to what I do privately in the RNLI. And it got my interest. I moved to the coast during the pandemic and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go a step further. I'm actually going to try and get involved. And that's what I did. So, yeah, it started with a picture on a wall and it went from there.
How much time and training is involved before turning up for the first time or picking up the phone to say, how can I get involved, and actually going out on a boat on a rescue rather than just a practice run?
Oh, there's a huge amount of training. You go to Hull to train, you get sort of so much experience put under your wings, because when you go out and when that pager goes off, you know you're responding to somebody's worst day. You're responding to somebody's worst moment. So in that moment, you've got to know you've got the skills, the equipment, how to use it, and how to use it under pressure, because some examples, you'll only get one chance to make that right decision. So you've got to rely on that training, rely on that experience. So you do have to go through the various training steps, get down to pull, but that only gives you that sort of experience and knowledge you will need. So yeah, there is a lot of experience and training that goes into it before you can put the famous yellows on, but it does set you up for what you'll encounter when you get out to sea.
So you're on call. They know at the station who's within striking distance of the boat, and you have a pager with you that can go off at any time of day or night. Is that right?
Oh, exactly that. Mine's gone off at rugby. Mine's gone off when I've been at the gym.
Really? Well, when you've been playing rugby, you've been actually on the pitch, as it were, and the thing's gone off, and you've just got to drop everything, including the ball, and run for the lifeboat station.
Exactly that. I was in the changing room just the other week, and it sort of, you get the famous and your adrenaline goes. You pause for a moment. Sorry, boys. Front row replacement, please, because that's where I've got to in life now. And off you go. Put the wellies on.
Is it scary?
Yeah, it can be scary because you know you're dealing with somebody's worst day, but you've got that training, you've got that experience, you've got those experienced crew members. So of course the adrenaline kicks in, of course it's scary, but my word, you know it's also rewarding too, and the positives far outweigh anything else I've ever got from being a crew member.
Or indeed a radio producer. I guess the mystery for many of us, even those of us who aren't particularly materialistic perhaps, is that it is almost entirely volunteers. I mean, there is nothing in it except the pride and satisfaction that you've just described.
It's exactly that. I've got no boating experience, absolutely none at all. I grew up in landlocked Peterborough, ended up on the coast through dint of life, and still I'm out there, doing my best and helping people where I can with the training that I've got. So with that in mind, it is complete volunteers, and you don't have to have come from, Henley regattas in order to know how to do a bowling knot. You can be anywhere you want to be in life and still contribute to the RNLI and play a really important role. And that's why it's so beautiful. There are all walks of life. In the crew that I'm part of, we've got Tesco delivery drivers, we've got people who are medically trained, and there are ambulance people. There are so many different walks of life, and we come together when we put our yellows on and we're one team, and that's so important.
Ash has been in touch, who you would have taken calls from him during Mystery Hour. He was one of our go-to experts for matters maritime, and he's written, "From a merchant seafarer, please thank this man from all of us. They are absolute angels, and they train harder than we do." Not to put too fine a point on it, Michael, you have also saved lives in the purest, simplest sense of those words.
The day is such a special day because when it's 200, James, you get to look back at you mentioned there being in Berwick, and you look back at some of the history, and we're lucky today. We've got proper boats, as we call them, and we've got proper equipment. Some of those heroes that I look back on that go out in life jackets made almost of stuff I can't even remember what it's made of. You realise just how heroic some of the people that have put on that RNLI logo over those 200 years have truly been. And that's why today, as you were mentioned, is such a special day, because you look back and go, do you know what? Yes, lives have been saved. Yes, I'm in the Dover crew. You know what goes with. saving lives in that busy shipping lane. However, with that in mind, you also look back in 200 moments and go, do you know what a positive charity to be part of. And I hope it lasts for another 200 years more.
What sort of state is the service in? Is it getting the support that it needs from the public? How can anybody listening to this maybe throw a few quid in the pot?
So that's why this 200 is brilliant. You look back, we just mentioned there, some of the real heroes that have been out to sea in those old wooden boats. You look at the modern day crew and say, do you know what? Brilliant. You're keeping us going. But anybody in their local community will have a 200 event going on. Get onto the RNLI website. Look across at what the RNLI 200 is doing near you. 20p in a pot or 20 grand in your will, whatever it is, however you do it, makes a huge difference to allowing us, every time we put our yellows on, to be properly equipped, properly trained, keeping the station down at pool afloat. Every contribution matters. And even if you're in landlocked Peterborough like I was growing up, those donations still find their way back to helping us when we go out on that pager shout.
Right, it's not, of course, not just distressed seamen and seafaring folk that you come to the rescue of. There'll also be tourists and prunes on lilos who've drifted far too far. I mean, everything goes, doesn't it? Or an injured surfer, all sorts of things that you'll be called out for.
Dog walkers, animals that can get stuck, people with sepsis on cruise liners I've shown up to.
Have you really? Good Lord.
Yeah, honestly, the helicopter can't get in because the weather's so bad, we get to evacuate them off. So whatever the shout, you're never quite sure until you get to the station what you're dealing with. The pager goes off. It doesn't tell you what it is until your coxswain standing at the board gives you that briefing. You never know what you're showing up to, but it could be anything.
I'm proud of you, mate.
Honestly, that means the world to me because when I was your producer, I was learning my trade, knee high, and I remember our arguments, me trying to get a story across the desk, and that means the world to me, mate. Because that really chimes me, mate. Thank you.
Well, we'll see you soon. It's very special to hear the passion in your voice and indeed the enthusiasm. Michael Keown there, radio professional, but also RNLI crew member who has been volunteering on those lifeboats for the past 3 years. So head over to the RNLI website and show your support in the, I suppose, in the simplest way possible. The time now is 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 12. Andy and Grimsby are knitting together a lot of reference points. We like it. Can you give your ex-producer a Ray Liotta on behalf of the whole RNLI? Because they will come. That's I'm not going to explain that to you. If you know, you know. That's really lovely, actually. And speaking of lovely, I think we got Bergerac trending. Other people were talking about it, obviously, because it's not just me that's noticed the news that it's going to be rebooted, perhaps with Aidan Turner in the lead role. But just clicking on the trend on X, on Twitter, a significant proportion of the number of people who've mentioned Bergerac in their tweets, which is, of course, what makes it trend, were responding to this programme. So that's only Monday, and we've already done our big achievement for the week. We got Bergerac trending. Fantastic. Right. And I love this topic. I don't know why I love it. I think it's because I stared down the barrel of childlessness, but not voluntarily. I won't bore you with all of the grisly details, but when Mrs. O'Brien and I decided to try to start a family, it did not go swimmingly. Literally swimmingly, actually, given that it was a sperm-related issue that caused us the problems that were happily resolved via IVF treatment. So I don't know whether that's part of the reason why I find the story so interesting, because I did sit with it. I sat with the possibility that it was never going to happen. And I grew up just expecting, like most people do, to be a parent one day. But it hadn't become like a passionate need by any stretch of the imagination. We married relatively young for our kind of circles, and my wife was very keen to get pregnant, to have a baby. And after a few months, or maybe even as much as a year, you realise that something is wrong. And suddenly, when you think it's never going to happen, then the aching need becomes almost unbearable. It's the weirdest thing. It's the weirdest thing. And the reason why I find the subject we're about to discuss so interesting is because I don't know what it's like to be on the other side of that. I don't know what it's like to be and to want to be voluntarily childless or child-free. And the discrimination that you face is what is under discussion. But I like to put my cards on the table whenever we're approaching a topic that involves me asking you to put your cards on the table in sometimes quite an intimate fashion, quite private thoughts. But I think that's why I find it so interesting, because I once you think it may never happen for you, if you're built like me, and thank God not everybody is, that would be unbearable, then it becomes even harder to imagine reaching your 20s and your 30s and just not feeling that thing that you want to be a parent. And this is very much a conversation about voluntary. It's not a conversation about having it thrust upon you, as it were. I'd love to have been a parent, but we couldn't afford it. That's different. It's not having any particular impulse or desire to be a mum or a dad. That you are, I believe, one of the most disregarded and unfairly ignored sections of society. I mean, just at entry level, to be the one person in your circle from work or college or school who hasn't become a parent means that you spend a minimum of 10 years of your life being a satellite to your closest friends, because you don't have the shared vocabulary, the shared experience. And in fact, you watch people, don't you, shift their social circles from the former colleagues who used to get together right through to former NCT. Some of our best friends are people that we met at the NCT class. I got one mate who's recently become a dad, one of my oldest friends, but it's too late for us to share tales of fatherhood. His little girl's 2 and mine's off to university in the not too distant future. So that idea that your family friendships, your couple friendships, as it were, are almost defined. I mean, how many of your mates now, if you are a parent, how many of your family friends are linked to school, to your children's school, not to your school? It's just logistical. It's not even conscious, is it? But the story that really caught my eye today, and actually it caught my eye for fairly obvious reasons if you listen to the programme close to regularly, because you know that I love these sorts of stories. I find these stories fascinating. I don't think it's right to say I love them. But the part of my motivation is the excuse me, I got a tiny tickle in my throat today. I hope it's gone tomorrow. That's why I'm wearing my scarf if you're watching me on the YouTube repeat that runs a little later every day. I like to reach out to people who normally get ignored by the media. I don't do it every day because it would be a little bit silly in purely commercial or ratings terms. But people who usually get ignored by the media are very interesting and very unfairly treated. So that's 52% of the reason why I like this story. The other 48% of the reason why I like this story is because it's about therapy, which is also something that I find absolutely magical and fascinating. So therapy groups are now being set up to support people who choose to be voluntarily childless or child-free. And the reason why these groups are being set up is because of the levels of discrimination, pressure, and stigma that you face. Now, the birth rates in England and Wales are at their lowest levels since data began. I mean, there are a whole heap of reasons for this, but the one we're interested in today is the choice, the active choice not to want to be a parent. Not that you can't afford it, not that it was too late by the time you met the person you wanted to do it with, not that you were denied by biology, but you know and you knew that you didn't want to be a parent. And the 3 things I want to hear about from you are the discrimination, the pressure, and the stigma, because I think it's one of those subjects that sometimes those of us who may be even responsible for the unpleasantness you experience don't realise that we're being unpleasant. Now, you can't expect as a friend or a family member, your sister or your brother-in-law or to sit down opposite you at the table and not talk about their children. But my goodness me, how many times do you have to respond to the question of whether or not we're soon going to hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet by saying, no, we're really not, before someone gets the hint and stops actually just presuming that breeding is a natural consequence of being human, because it isn't. And yet, I mean it when I say that you must be among the most marginalised and misunderstood sections of our society. So let's do our bit today to fix that. Give me the examples of... And you may not feel you need to sign up for therapy, for group therapy to support each other, but you are unlikely to have a bunch of friends who have lived the same experience as you. Whereas if you're a parent, you are guaranteed to have a bunch of friends who have lived the same experience as you. I mean, it's actually, when you think about it in statistical terms, it's absurd. I mean, how many people do you know that don't have children? Right? It's going to be a relatively low number. Even if you're in it, it's going to be a relatively low number. And yet, when you say to a parent, how many people do you know who are parents? The answer is almost everybody. So I've got a sister who doesn't have children, but all of her close friends have children. All of her family members have children. I don't think, but I've never asked, that she suffers unduly from discrimination, stigma, or pressure. But if she did, how would I be aware of it? Answer, give me a call. Men and women, please. I often, when we're reaching into family-related issues, I like to see the switchboard lean towards women. But on this one, I'm interested in men as well, because I suspect that childless women, child-free, voluntarily, key word, voluntarily childless women, actually are probably, and I don't want to get into trouble to this, are probably more acknowledged than voluntarily childless men. I don't know. You get asked about it less if you're a man, but you get fewer opportunities to explain it if you're a man as well. I guess we've got that age-old, centuries-old, millennia-old association of womanhood with nurture and motherhood, so you just think it's weirder when a woman doesn't want to be a parent. But I want to hear from men as well. Let's get the phone lines open. 0345 6060973. What are the things you have to put up with that the rest of us will be surprised by? The things that we do as parents or breeders, I don't like that term, but I think it's used in these sort of contexts sometimes. What is it that we do that we don't realise is hurtful for you? And if hurtful's too strong a word, I want to know what it's like, as it were. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. In a sense, I'm asking, why would you need therapy groups? But the answer to that is because you face discrimination, pressure and stigma that the rest of us will be largely or supremely unaware of, okay? So that's 0345 6060973. I throw something else into the mix as well. Having done Scottish politics in the last hour, I've got another game for you, following on from... We made Bergerac trend. I think we can all take a little bit of satisfaction from that shared achievement. So here's another game for you. Why did Irish politics prompt the BBC to effectively ban an episode of Star Trek? You're not allowed to enter this if you've seen the story, all right? You can don't ring me, you can WhatsApp me, 0345 6060973. You can text me on 84850. You can tweet me at LBC. But Irish politics, one episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. I absolutely love this story. There's one episode of Star Trek The Next Generation that got shown once in 2007 at 20 to 3 in the morning. Now, I don't know if you remember what the telly was like 10, 15, 20 years ago, but it was impossible at one point to turn on one BBC channel without finding an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. That's the one with Jean-Luc Picard and Patrick Stewart saying, make it so. So there's one episode of The Next Generation that has never been seen. It got broadcast once at 20 to 3 in the morning. So unless you'd set your video, and in 2007 you wouldn't have had to set your video, you'd have had your box, wouldn't you? But why would Irish politics prevent the BBC from screening one episode of an American-made sci-fi programme? It's actually brilliant, this. And another one for you to file away in your trivia banks and hope that one day the subject comes up somewhere other than here.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:18 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If I say to you, right, why do you think there is an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation that never got broadcast because of Irish politics? And I say to you, don't enter if you know the answer already. Have a guess. And you get in touch by telling me the name of the episode involved, and about 40 people have literally just named the episode involved, then you haven't really been paying attention, have you? Because if you can name the episode involved, then you do not fit into the category of people who don't know what the answer is already, but want to have a speculative guess. So I better tell you now then, before my inbox is clogged up by people saying, it was the higher ground. In fact, loads and loads of people. Because Data, who's the sort of robot, the android, he talked of the Irish unification of 2024 being an example of a terrorism campaign proving successful? I mean, it's a very tricky question at the best of times. But it is now, of course, 2024, which I presume is why the stories come back round again. But that is why the episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, written by somebody whose name, forgive me, sounds like a made-up name, doesn't it? Melinda M. Snodgrass. If you were going to make up a name of a TV scriptwriter, Melinda M. Snodgrass would be a contender, surely. But that is why. I'm not stringing this one out. I'm telling you that the answer to the question is that the prospect of Irish unification was mooted as a consequence of what they describe as a successful terrorism campaign. Anyway, you live and learn. Back to the question of voluntary childlessness and the way you are treated by everybody else or society in particular. Alison is in Glasgow to kick things off. Alison, what would you like to say?
Hello, Jane.
Hello,
I've not been on the radio before. This is a bit more nerve-wracking.
Well, I've been on loads. So between the two of us, we've got quite a few miles on the clock, Alison. Do not worry.
Okay. So what was the question again?
You really haven't done this before, have you? Well, I'm interested in the notion that being voluntarily childless prompts people to stigmatise, to be rude, to discriminate, the pressure, the stigma and the discrimination that you face.
Well, in everyday life, not really very much, because people don't know that you're childless. But I guess, particularly when I was in my 30s, I suppose, and everybody, if they hadn't already started having children, wanted to, and were starting to get married and move to the suburbs and everything, and I've never done that. It was the assumption that I don't have children because I don't like them.
Okay.
And therefore, I would then start to be, I felt a bit excluded from things. So they'd say, oh, we went to visit a mutual friend who just had a baby. Yes. I was like, oh, you didn't tell me, why didn't we go? Oh, well, you don't like children, so we didn't invite you. And that doesn't happen so much anymore, but we're definitely in my 30s. That was.
And you'd have to make the point, that you do like children, and because I think that presumption is reasonable, even if it's not fair. Yeah,
well, it's always a joke, isn't it? I do, I couldn't eat a whole one. But yeah.
Why would you want to come if you don't? And that sees your social circle squeeze a bit then, because they're spending more and more time with each other based upon the children playing together, and you're more and more likely to be.
I guess so, but I was just saying to your researcher before, also maybe I don't really have the same kind of lived experience as yourself, James, because a lot of my friends don't have children.
Oh, okay.
Some of them have wanted to, and it's just never happened.
Right.
Some of them, like yourself, have gone through the IVF route or gone down the adoption route. But that means really that my friendship circle, there's no kind of conglomerate of, they don't all have children the same age. So it's been very kind of staggered.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Kind of thing.
That's nice,
but
isn't it? And there'll be gravitation as well. There will be a slight gravitation towards each other if you're in the same position, because you've got more in common. I suppose some of us can only talk about our children. We become more and more boring with every passing year.
That's okay.
Yes.
I'm quite, I do enjoy going out to, I've got, they do tend to live in the suburbs, whereas I still live in the city, but go out and visit people with their kids.
When did you realise?
Growing up.
When did you realise?
When did I?
Yeah.
That I didn't want kids.
Yeah.
There wasn't really a dawning point. I've never really wanted to play with baby dolls. I've always preferred Barbie. And when people started to get married, I'm not married either. And it's just never something that I really wanted to do. And then as people were kind of pairing off and starting to have children, I'm just like, that's nice, but not for me. It wasn't. I've had some friends who have really had the, I want to get married and I want to have children.
Yeah.
Never really had that. So it's not
quite
something
liberating.
that fell away.
You make it sound quite liberating.
Came. Oh, I love it. Yeah, I've got all this disposable income and only me to spend it on.
Everybody's jealous now.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, carry on.
Stigma.
Yes.
The other stigma is that you're selfish. You do what you want when you want, and you don't really care about having a family and this, that, and the other. It's not really selfishness, and
well, it's chicken and egg. These are benefits of being voluntarily childless, but you haven't mentioned any of that in your sort of journey to that space. It's just almost the way the cookie crumbled, isn't it? The way the dice landed. You just didn't have that when that impulse kicked in with some of us. It just didn't kick in with you, and as a consequence of that, you get the freedom and all the disposable income, but Some people may be different. Some people may have said, no, I'd quite like children, but I'd like to have all my money even more. And I don't know quite where that would take you. Alison, thank you. A perfect debut, a sparkling debut, 24 minutes after 12. Charlotte's in Crawley. Charlotte, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Firstly, I can't believe I'm about to ask James O'Brien to change how he says something, but we're going to do it.
Oh, go on. What is it? What am I doing now? Everyone's a critic.
We're not childless.
Child-free.
Yes, and the only reason I say that is because I've had friends and I've worked with women that genuinely are childless, that have had miscarriages and are desperate to have a family, it's just not happening. And I
did keep saying voluntarily. You know how I bridle at criticism, Charlotte, even the most polite and well-justified criticism, but I did keep saying voluntarily.
I know, when you're like a journalistic hero of mine, and kind. I'm like, oh my God.
No, you win. Child-free. Child-free.
It's just because we have a choice, and we've made that choice, and there are some women and some couples who heartbreakingly don't have it.
So what is it like to be in the camp of people who have made the choice to be child-free?
I'm 33, be 34 in June, and I've finally met my soulmate and my best friend.
Yes.
And he's 18 months younger than me. And one of the first questions on our first date was, do you want kids? And we both said no. And we had, we've been together ever since. But I've been told...
He has other charms, I hope.
Oh, he's the best thing in the world.
Yes, genuinely. Good. Just checking that you both do. It'd be an odd thing to build an entire relationship on, but I take your point.
He is the best human ever. But, I've been told I will never know true love until I have a child. I'm not a real woman until I give birth.
Good Lord.
I'm depriving my parents of grandchildren.
Yes. Well, that's technically true.
I suppose, but I think...
But they're making it sound like an act of selfishness rather than just a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, I think... I know full well that my dad would say, do what makes you happy, Charlotte. Because that's all, as a parent, he has ever wanted for me. Absolutely. And if me not having children is doing what makes me happy, then what's wrong with that? But there's a lot of stigma, a lot of... What do you mean you don't want kids?
Yeah. How high up?
I've had that. I've had someone say, but you're a woman. I'm like, well, thank you for noticing.
How high up the ladder of people you like does this come from? Do you see what I mean? Because strangers, fertility in general is one of the oddest things, isn't it? It's such an intimate, personal thing, and yet even relative strangers think they're allowed to comment on it. But I'm interested in people that know you behaving like this. Does that happen as well?
No, because... I wouldn't surround myself with those type of people. I have a very small tribe, for want of a better word. I have lost friends over, they've started their families.
Yes.
And it's just been so hard to maintain that friendship. Yes. And I've lost friends over it.
Just because of logistics more than anything else. Is it?
Also, you don't have things to talk about. So my life revolves around my partner and our pets who... people are going to disagree with this, and that's fine, but they are our children. They are the absolute centre of our little team.
Yeah.
And, Sundays for me are long walks with the dog and my partner in the countryside, and home and chilling out on the couch watching TV together. That's our team, that's our tribe. And a lot of people look at you sometimes and think, but, why don't you just have the baby? And then when it's here, you'll love it. And I'm standing there thinking, I probably would love it, but I don't want it. And that in itself would make me a bad parent.
Yeah, and certainly it's not worth rolling the dice in the hope that when you hold the baby, you suddenly go, oh my God, this is all I've ever wanted all my life, because there's an equal chance that you won't, and then you would have done something dangerous.
Exactly. I've got quite a bit of tattoos. I had one done on Saturday, and it's almost that kind of... If you don't like the tattoo, it's a little bit difficult to get rid of it, and it's a little bit difficult to get it off your skin. And that's kind of the same. You can't just bring a child into this world and then say, oh, oops, that's not how that works. And no child deserves that. Every child deserves to have a family and a team and a unit around them that absolutely absolutely adores them. And I'm not that person. And if that makes me any less of a woman, then okay.
Well, I think we both know that it doesn't. What was the tattoo of? What's the new one?
Oh, it's behind my ear on my neck, which I know sounds, again, awful, but it's very delicate. It's very pretty.
That sounds nice. What is it, though? You didn't tell me. You don't have to.
It's like I don't know, like a trellis work.
Oh, yeah.
Thing. Okay. I don't know, but it's very pretty and
so
it
doesn't hurt. So you see it in the book and you think, I like that and I know where that would look good. Or did you come up with the idea and take it to the artist?
Well, it's the first one I've had that has absolutely no meaning because all of my others have got, I've got my grandfather's RAF number, I've got my dad's warrant card. My dad was a police officer. He wasn't a horrible one. I now feel like I need to
qualify. No, you don't. You don't need to qualify anything. But you do. I mean, obviously feel sometimes you need to explain yourself when you don't. And that's the whole point of this phone-in. You shouldn't, but you live in a society where you do. And I'm sorry for that, actually. It's not fair. So one thing that Melanie's picked you up on, and this is, I'm only reading this because Charlotte picked me up on it. It says it is actually separating the childless and the child-free in this context is not helpful because the discrimination is the same. Those who chose to be child-free are much better equipped to deal with the discrimination, and both sides need to work together against it. How hurtful and crushing do you think it is for a childless person who has been through multiple unsuccessful fertility treatments, such as myself, to be told that I don't understand love because I'm not a mother? I have had a woman ask if I had children, and when I said no, she said, oh, and turned around and disappeared. I think you're both right, oddly. I take Charlotte's point about the distinction being relevant, and I take your point, or Melanie, about the distinction being unhelpful, which I know it sounds a bit like a politician's answer, but you've both made your case so perfectly. I think it's just important to remember you both in the same breath. 12:31 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Two stories about teenagers in the news today that completely tally with some of the conversations we've had together in recent months and years. One, I don't know about this, but a head teacher has actually gone there and said that he wants his pupils to have those sort of basic brick phones. You remember? Do you know what will happen? I'm going to make a prediction here. Start the tape. You know what will happen if they give everyone a Nokia brick phone? We'll be reading articles in the Daily Mail within 6 months about how a generation is addicted to Snake. I'm going to let that one settle a bit. I'm just looking at my younger colleagues, both in their 20s. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? No idea what I'm talking about. You're of a certain age and you had a Nokia phone and it felt like the future was in your hand. There was only one game on it, and that game was Snake. It was addictive like Tetris was addictive. So, albeit that they currently think it's a whiz-bang idea to take away children's smartphones and give them a brick phone, I think you'll probably have like playground fights over who's best at Snake. A generation of children addicted to Snake. That's the problem with moral panics. Sometimes the space created by the need for a moral panic, anything will do. Anything will move. Look at Honest Bob Jenrick going on about immigration. He'd be going on about single mothers or unemployed people or disabled people. I mean, there's anything he could be going on about. He just needs a moral panic at the moment. A, to distract from the reality of 14 years of Tory rule, and B, to make people feel that they're under threat from something other than the reality of 14 years of Tory rule. So I don't know that will work. The other story is a bit more serious. The proportion of British teenagers that believe their generation will have worse lives than those of their parents. I wouldn't be surprised if someone gets stuck into that today, and I may well do so tomorrow. But you know how I like to give you recommendations for stuff, don't you? I've got a couple. Sorry, John in Whitney, Rob in Durham. I'll be with you imminently, but I often forget to do this. So that I don't know if you've seen it, but the new Wim Wenders film, Perfect Days, and also the film American Fiction. I've seen both in the last week, and I forgot to tell you, and they are just absolutely brilliant films. In fact, American Fiction is so good that I don't know that Oppenheimer is actually a shoo-in for the Oscar. You heard it here first. Back to the question of child-free humans, people who have chosen to be childless. The experiences of people who have had it thrust upon them will be worse because you have that added angst and horror and regret. But when you've chosen to be childless and other people think that somehow gives them a license to speak to you in remarkably rude ways, and that perhaps is putting it kindly. I want to know what that's like. We may get onto the question of why we think it happens, but, I'm wibbling on so much that we probably won't have time. To wit, John's in Witney. John, what would you like to say?
Yes. Hi, how's it going? I guess I've got a couple of points.
Good.
The first is...
God, we'd be lost if you didn't, John.
Yeah, exactly. I guess the first thing is the number of people who have throughout my life told me that, you'll change your mind. And I decided that I didn't want children around the time that I decided I didn't need religion. I grew up in a Catholic family.
Okay.
And it sort of coincided around the same time.
How old were you?
Probably about 13, 14 years old.
Okay. So I can see if I said to a 13-year-old, you might change your mind, or even you will change your mind. I can. That's not quite as obnoxious as saying it to a 30-year-old, is it? But I presume it's happened to you at both stages.
Throughout my life, I'm 52 now, so it's been. Yeah, it's been sort of a semi-constant thing throughout my life. But I just knew. I knew for a fact, and but because it was often older people telling me, it was like, oh, will I? I don't think I will.
Yeah.
But, and then I didn't. The other thing that's been really interesting is sort of in my 20s and 30s, watching relationships that I was in break down because people who initially, when I met them, said, definitely don't want kids when they're in their early 20s and mid-20s and such. As time went on, that state changed. And pretty much I think everyone has now got children. Maybe I think one person doesn't.
Yeah.
But I've had a much
And they were telling
time.
the truth originally, or they just thought you'd come round, or I think they changed a bit. They felt the clock ticking a
bit of column A, a bit of column B, probably.
Yeah, nice answer.
Yeah, but certainly my current partner, my wife, received a lot more stick than I did. She tells a wonderful story where her mother asked her, how's your biological clock?
Right.
And she responded with, how are your hemorrhoids? The idea being...
That's the point I was trying to make about... That's why I use the word licence. It's the oddest thing that people... I'll tell you, the only other thing I think is a bit like it is men losing their hair, John. I don't know whether you've had that indignity. But
I've got a full head of hair.
Oh, great. And we were getting on so well. People think that they can comment on this in the most sort of casual and remarkable way, whereas other conditions, other human conditions, I don't know, eczema, no one's going to comment on that in a kind of Mickey-taking... But fertility, much more serious than losing your hair. People do think that it's public property, don't they?
They do, but I kind of don't think it's... For me, it's not that serious, really. I take it in my stride now. I sort of think it like, well, I'm not interested in football. I don't refer to myself as a non-footballer.
No, fair enough. No one's going to think of you...
I'm a non-driver, it's...
You're not an unnatural man by dint of not having children. Some people think that you would be, where you were a woman, that there would be something unnatural about it.
100%.
It's weird. That's nice. I like the men's perspective on this. It's very honest of you as well to explain it must be worse for women, but not. I mean, what I was trying to hit on was it's not irrelevant to men either. It is still to be a child-free bloke, particularly, I guess, in a relationship, puts you in a place where other people think they can talk to you in a way that you simply wouldn't do if it was hemorrhoids you had, as opposed to no children, to use John's wife's rather lovely intervention. Rob's in Durham. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous.
It's only me. It's only me, mate. Welcome.
I've been listening to you for years, though. So what happens? Well, never mind. I think from my perspective, I think see, I'm 34. My wife's 34. We've been together about 5 years. We decided kind of just when we started seeing each other that kids weren't really on the cards for either of us. And she works with children, so that's, I think, to put it kind of bluntly, that she gets her fill in that sense if she's feeling any kind of maternal thing that way.
How old are you both, if you don't mind me asking?
34.
So did you say that? I didn't.
Yeah,
sorry. Forgive me. No,
no problem.
No, it's my fault. So you see, I'm just thinking back to John's call, and you say you're 34. And I have to now guard against saying, well, you might change your mind, but you've probably been having that since you got together.
Yeah, I think, well, for me, it was I was a little bit more indifferent, and I think we both were. And then as we've kind of been together longer, we've just sort of gravitated naturally sort of one way. Yeah, but I think the main stigma for me, it's strange because I think from the male perspective, again, so I'm comment on that. Yeah. It's more the guys I've worked with, the guys who and sort of best friends and stuff like that, a lot of them have kids, and it's one of the things where they'll say, "Oh, you will do one day," and I'll just say no, and that. But for me, it's kind of that's the conversation stopped. It doesn't tend to go on. I think with my wife, it carries on. But the one thing I can say from my side is when after me and her got married, we've been together just over a year now. Married, and it was having the conversation with my mum,
right,
where she sort of said, when are you thinking? And it was she knew I wasn't kind of looking to have kids, but I think when she thought when we got married our perspectives would change, and because they haven't, it really upsets her to the point where she doesn't want to talk about it now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's
her loss, isn't it? Rather than
but you don't want to upset your own mother.
Mum, no, of course you don't. But she is thinking of the grandchild she won't have.
Yeah.
Which in a way that's her expectations.
Yeah,
not, not being regarded. So it's complicated business then, isn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely.
It's a tough one. And what about the social circle? Like 34 is an interesting age because I presume the majority of the people you were knocking around with in your 20s have now become parents.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, my best friend's actually becoming a dad in a couple of months' time. So
that'll be interesting.
Yeah. So, but I think what seems to have happened is our social circles have changed. So we still have friends our age and kind of older, but we tend to, I guess, sort of gravitate more towards younger people now. Sort of people in the late 20s who are in a similar mindset, or people who naturally are.
Yeah, and then you'll also find that becoming self-selecting based on what you have in common, and as you get older, the age thing will become less relevant, and you'll be knocking about with people with whom you have the child freeness in common, as even though the age changes. Mark's been in touch. Thank you for the lovely words, Mark, about my introduction to this. I was trying particularly hard to be sensitive, but Mark says, I'm now in my early 60s, my wife's 52, and we've never wanted children, but we have a group of about 10 friends that we've known for over 30 years. Only 1 out of the 10 of them have children. I can't state for sure that they're all child-free by choice, but that is our world. 12:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
Gosh, it's 12. How did that happen? It's 12:49 already. My goodness. And I've got a tickly throat. That normally makes the show seem a little longer than usual. What do you mean it does for you? That's not very nice, is it? Honestly. Back to this question, this vexed question, and thank you. We got it right today. We don't always get this one right. I think sometimes you almost fall foul of your own experiences. But the discrimination, the pressure, the stigma of being child-free, as in voluntarily childless. What is it like? Daisy's in, is that right? High Easter?
Yeah, High Easter in Essex.
No, I saw the S. I'd never heard of High Easter. Is it 2 words?
Yeah, it is. It's a small, very small village.
Well, do we know where does the name come from? Do we know where it comes from?
No, but there's a good Easter down the road.
This is like Midsummer Murders, isn't it? It's
it really is.
Little Midsummer. I've had a High Easter, but I don't know that I've ever been there. What would you like to say, Daisy?
Well, I mean, thank you so much for this segment, because I'm not 30. I'm 41.
Right. Do you want to check?
I know. Do you know what? I did think this morning, oh my God, how old am I? But yeah, no, I'm 41. And I knew when I was very young that I didn't want to have kids.
Gosh.
And so, I mean, I'm talking about my teenage years. Yeah. I just knew that I didn't want children. And it was so hard, you know, in my 20s, my late 20s, even my early 30s, because so many people kept asking me, when are you going to have kids?
Yeah.
And it just got to the point where I just rolled my eyes, because I was like, oh, not this again. You know, because
it's quite rude, isn't it? I mean, not least because you may not have made that choice freely. It may have been sort of inflicted upon you by circumstance, or in which case it really hurts when people say that, and you're desperately trying, but you don't want to go public with the tribulations that you're having. But it's annoying for you as well.
Yeah, it is. It's really frustrating, and I think you just kind of, I don't know, you just get to the point where you think, I'm so fed up with having to almost justify myself, because it's like one of your callers said previously, that you are looked at, that you're being selfish, and that it is selfish. And it's really difficult because I can understand why people do think that way, but equally, I'm like, well, actually, I
can't. I think you're being too kind. Why is it selfish?
I don't know. I don't know, because I feel almost bad when I'm around people and they're knackered and they've got kids, and there's me, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to get up at sort of 10
knackered, skint,
on toast.
skint, knackered, all the rest of it. I'm flipping it. But so I'm trying to work out where the selfishness accusation comes from. That must come from people who are not in that moment enjoying being parents very much.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Why is it selfish? I mean, it's not selfish at all. They're just thinking, God, if I didn't have children, I could be like Daisy, and so they're jealous of you. That's what's happening there. It's not a sign that I
just then feel bad, because then I'm like, oh no, I don't want to upset anyone.
No.
You know, it's so difficult.
Where does the pressure come from? Who's worse, friends or family?
I think originally it was family.
Yeah.
And friends now, my mates have just accepted that that's just the way it is for me. You know, I'll have their kids, I'll borrow them, look after them, do whatever, and then I'll say, you can have them back now.
So you don't dislike children. You just never wanted any of your own. Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, I love kids, and I have so much energy. So when I'm with them, it's like woo.
That
you
would
know.
be one distinguishing factor between a parent and a non-parent. I'd go fast for energy.
I think so.
Energy followed fast by money. Finally, Daisy, and forgive me if I'm being rude. What about partners? Where do they fit into this process?
So my partner, he's got kids from a previous relationship. And they're older. I love them to bits, and it's great, and it's fine. And you know, when we got together, I remember saying to him, you know, I don't want children, and he said, that's fine, it's fine, I don't want. And you know, we were younger, and it's it works, it's brilliant, you
That's
know.
it, isn't it?
I'm really grateful.
All
for that,
human,
you know?
all human life is here, Daisy. Thank you. I love that, and is it worth making a special trip out to visit High Easter, or would it be an anticlimax?
You know what? It is.
Is it?
They've got a lovely little cafe here.
Okay.
Nice big lake.
Oh, that's
nice
better.
Walk around.
Yeah, all right, you're on.
There's a good pub down the road.
God, it's got the lot, really, hasn't it?
It's got the lot. It's got the lot.
Flipping High Easter, beautiful name for a place. I love that a lot. Take care, Daisy. I'm going to read this because I'm sorry, and I don't know if you'll still be listening, Richard. But if anyone else is close to this category but still has their radio on, I want to read this out because I think it's really important, and we haven't touched on this today. As a gay man who has wanted kids since I was 14 and tried adoption, fostering, and even surrogacy, but it's never worked, I've had to turn you off today, James, as I'm still heartbroken, and at 42, I've realised that it's never going to happen. It breaks my heart daily, and it's never off my mind. I hope you are still listening, because I'm told it will get better. In fact, I can promise you it will get better, and everything that seems terrible in a moment will be better moments hence. But I feel your pain, mate, and I'm sorry for bringing it to the surface today. I know you understand why we have done and why we will do again one day, but I do want you to know that I see you. I see you and I hear you, and I'm sorry. Harry's in Lincoln. Harry, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just about the discrimination you see go through. So I'm 42 male, and I've just never had a paternal bone in my body.
Yeah.
So, you know, when people bring kids in the office, I'd actively go away.
So you don't like children? It's not just that you haven't got a paternal bone in your body.
It's not I don't like them. It's just a bit of a...
Well, you just said I actively go away. That's not the action of someone who's sort of enthusiastic about the prospect, is it?
It's more the fear of like having to hold a child and things like that. And
fair enough.
I think that's the only thing. And I just...
Because you're worried you might drop it?
Yeah, I'm really
reasonable.
clumsy.
Very reasonable.
But yeah, so I work in a customer-facing role, and when you meet new people and things like that, they're like, "Oh, how many kids have you got?" And as soon as you say, "I've none," they just look at you and say, "Why?" And it's as if you've got like a third eye.
But they also don't know where to go next with the conversation. So there's a line here between discrimination and small talk. Exactly. It's such an easy thing for small talk, isn't it? And then you go, "Nope." I haven't got. Just lie, mate. Especially if there's a big sale on the horizon. So I've got 17. I've got 17, and you'll be there for the next 20 minutes having a conversation about. I've got 17 children by 16 different women. Just call me Boris.
I'll have to give that one a try.
No, you better not. So it doesn't sound like it's a source of never-ending pain to you, but it is a pain in the butt.
It is. It's more awkwardness.
Yes.
And I think you feel awkward, and then inevitably the other person feels awkward, and it's, and then it goes to the other thing. I mean, if you're single, people immediately, so you're homosexual. No.
What? Why would they think you would get single? Homosexual because you were single?
Yeah, no, single, no child. That's immediate. That's
see.
what I think. Yeah, that's what I think. Devilment in me does play up to it sometimes, just leaving an air of mystery, so it keeps people confused. But
I like it.
Yeah, it's just one of them. It's one of them things naturally people's go to, and I've never understood why.
And still, well, you can tell by today's conversations that it's not something that gets a light shone on it very often. I'm very short of time, but I'm going to squeeze in Jim, who's in Kensington. Jim, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I've been with my wife now. We've been together since 1991, and I'm sort of similar age to you. I'm 52.
Yep.
And she said from the get-go, don't want kids.
Okay.
I would have had kids, but she just didn't want them. And obviously, got to respect the ladies' wishes, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to carry them.
There's not a lot you can do about it, really, is there?
Not really, no. So basically, but we've got a great life. We really are. But yeah, this whole thing, like what quite a few of the callers have said, it's like I was in a taxi a little while ago, and the guy driving me had a photograph on the dash. He had about 5 or 6 kids, and I said, "Wow, is that your family?" He said, "Yeah." And he was rightly very proud, and I said, "Oh, wow, amazing," And he said, "How many kids have you got?" And I said, "None." And he said, "Are you married?" I said, "Yeah, I've been with my wife since '91." He went, "You got no kids?" I was like, "No." And he's like, what went wrong?
This is very cheeky, isn't it?
What went wrong?
But imagine if something had. It's an insensitive question for you where nothing's gone wrong, but imagine if something had gone wrong. It becomes twice as insensitive.
And barbers as well. Every time I get my hair cut, how many kids you got, mate? I'm like, none. It's like, it's just a funny thing,
Yes, it is a very funny thing. I think the best word I've got is license. People think they've got the license to make these inquiries into what is quite personal and private business, and to do so in a really clumsy and quite insensitive fashion. Jim, perfect ending to a really interesting conversation that we will return to at a later date. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, find out how we got Bergerac trending. It's the official LBC app where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
I want to live in High Easter.
It sounds lovely, doesn't it?
It does sound lovely.
Do you know where it comes from? You'll like this.
Go on.
I don't know how to pronounce this. EOWESTRE, so it would mean sheepfold, a high sheepfold originally. Oh. So that's you like you. Euster sheepfold.
Euster.
That's nice, isn't it?
Euster.
That's from
Very
John
nice.
Farrell, who's a bit of an etymologist.
Yeah, I'd better get on.
Sorry, sorry,
I started
No,
it.
you crack on.
But I better get on.
James O'Brien on LBC.